Before your eyes lies the realm of the dead, Necropia, a realm reserved exclusively for the dead, devoid of any trace of life. A great castle stands in these wastelands, the only castle in the necropolis. Ruling over it all is the absolute lord of Necropia, Karnak, the one who has transcended all limitations and mastered death itself. He who transcended and controlled death itself finally achieved this feat after a century. Humans, however, were not made to control forces such as death. In his days as a human, Karnak was the bastard son of a noble family in decline. He lost his mother at a young age and faced pressure from the other nobles, but grew up relying only on himself, developing a strong desire for power. Eventually, he obtained a forbidden codex on necromancy and learned the corrupted ways beyond humanity. Soon after, Karnak led all humans and his kingdom to their deaths. The 4 martial kings and the 3 great magi resisted Karnak, but he turned them into his subjects. Even the guardians of the world tried to stop him, but when Karnak turned the last guardian, the Dragon Emperor, into his servant, he ascended as Asura Shnaf, the most powerful king of death that ever lived. Now, Karnak, sitting on his throne in the castle, reflects on everything he has achieved. 70 years have passed since he erected his castle and became the king of death, but he realizes that even with all this power, his existence is empty. His body, reduced to bones, feels nothing, no heat, no cold, no pain. He wonders how much longer he can endure this meaningless existence. He longs for the warmth of the sun, the gentle breeze, or even pain, anything that would take him away from this dry and empty life. Looking around, Karnak tells himself that there is still hope. He observes a tombstone emanating powerful magic, and suddenly the sound of footsteps approaches. A knight kneels before him, saluting the Lord of the Dead, the conqueror of life and death, ruler of the kingdom of Necropia. This knight is Baros, the commander of the Legion of the Dead. Karnak informs Baros that the preparations are ready, and Baros is shocked to realize that the moment has finally arrived. Karnak explains that he had tried various methods to feel something, be it pleasure or pain, but nothing worked. He had possessed other bodies, tried empiricism, but nothing brought back the human sensations. He concludes that ascended beings will never be able to experience the pleasures of a human. However, Karnak believes that if he can return to his days as a human, perhaps this will change. He reveals to Baros that the chosen moment will be when he first learned black magic. Baros wonders what will happen if they fail this temporal spell, if perhaps they will cease to exist in the timeline. Karnak, for his part, asks Baros if he really wants to continue living the way he is now, to which Baros replies that he does not. The two agree that it's all or nothing. In the next scene, Karnak wakes up and is called by Baros. Baros asks if he's all right, and Karnak is confused, as Baros' face seems familiar, but at the same time strange, as if he hasn't seen him for a long time. Baros comments that his face is as handsome and pompous as ever, and Karnak wonders if this was a compliment or an insult. The two stand up, and Karnak realizes that they are in front of the codex that taught him the basics of necromancy. He uses magic to burn the codex, and Baros asks if it is really safe to destroy it. Karnak replies that he already possesses all the power contained in the codex, and that it was just the basics of black magic. He would rather get rid of the codex now than deal with it in the future. Baros, amazed, comments on how clever and calculating his young master always is. But suddenly they both stop as they hear their stomachs growl, something Karnak hasn't heard for a long time. Baros wonders if they're really hungry, and the two leave the cave, saying they're going to get something to eat. In the next scene, they arrive in a very busy town, almost at dusk, and enter a very noisy tavern. The noise is partly because they are both there, shouting with delight. They comment on how wonderful the food is and what a pleasure it is to satisfy their hunger. Baros even cries as he takes a bite of the bread, saying that it tastes so good that he would die for it. Karnak quickly replies, "No, we're not going to die. We're alive for a reason." Baros agrees, saying that betting it all was a good decision, and comments that the food is so delicious that he can hardly see it for the tears he shed. Karnak, also moved, warns Baros to be careful how much he eats, as they still have to manage the money, which doesn't fall from the sky. While they are eating, the waiter passes by serving another table, and the two of them take a curious look at what is being served, a golden, juicy chicken. Karnak comments that it looks delicious, but Baros, of course, reminds them that they can't afford something like that, since they belong to a fallen noble family and have no money. Karnak jokes that he could kill them all to get that chicken, but Baros, frightened, asks for calm, pointing out that, even with all the power they possess, they would probably be beaten up for causing a fuss. Baros laments that he is poor as he looks at his money bag. Suddenly, he is shocked to realize something and warns Karnak of a possible problem. Karnak, confused, asks what's going on, and Barrows explains that perhaps the temporal spell has gone wrong in some respects. When Karnak looks inside the money pouch, he also notices something strange. There are lots of silver coins, something that doesn't make sense to them, considering that they belong to a poor family at the time. Karnak begins to wonder what went wrong with the spell. He remembers that, at that time, the financial situation of his family and Barrow's family, the Zestrad family, was one of extreme poverty. Karnak's grandfather, Baron Grello, had made several failed investments, which resulted in heavy debts for Karnak's father, Baron Krapu. Unfortunately, Karnak's father didn't have the necessary skills to deal with these debts, and his legitimate children, the sons of his main wife, were useless and no help at all. Karnak, being the bastard son, was always despised and mistreated by his family. Karnak wonders if he should be happy that they have so much money, but quickly realizes that this could mean that the time spell has gone wrong. Barrows admits that he doesn't know much about magic, being only a swordsman, but Karnak is increasingly confused, as everything seems familiar, but at the same time, something is different. Barrows, trying to defuse the situation, comments that with so much money they could buy that chicken, and Karnak agrees. Barrows asks if they should only order one chicken, but Karnak replies that they will order two. In the next scene, they call the waiter and order 2 whole chickens. A while later, Barrows, already full, comments that he's about to fall into a food coma, and Karnak jokes that when they get home, they won't even sleep, just pass out from eating so much. However, Barrows expresses his concern about meeting again his annoying family and the people who insulted them in the past, but Karnak reassures him, saying that everyone will be meek and obedient as long as they flatter them. However, Karnak also comments that the most worrying thing is how strange the situation is, and Barrows agrees, saying that it wasn't just 1 or 2 strange things but many. He noted that even the fact that he was riding such a well-bred horse was strange. The stable manager flattered them as if they were extremely influential nobles, which made no sense for a family in decline. What's more, as they passed through town, they noticed that the commoners who had previously despised them were acting differently. This time, they were so moved that they even cried when they saw the people in the town reacting in the same way. The citizens were thrilled, praising our protagonists and saying that they were wonderful nobles. Karnak, however, comments that this is all very strange and that he is uneasy about the situation. Barrows suggests that they discuss it further at a meeting when they get home. And speaking of home, they're almost there. We see a large condominium with several fancy houses, mansions, and even a castle in the background as the sun sets over the horizon. Karnak comments that he hasn't seen this landscape for a long time and that he's even a little nostalgic, but Barrows replies that, for him, that place only brings anger. Karnak begins to explain that Barrows was also an orphan and didn't have a comfortable life. His parents were real scammers and, before abandoning him in the middle of the night, Karnak found him dying alone. He took Barrows home and, surprisingly, Karnak's father allowed him to stay. Karnak reflected that, even though he was an illegitimate son, his family needed to keep up appearances, and he would need a chaperone. Suddenly, Barrows interrupts Karnak's thoughts, asking if this really is the former home of the Zestrad family. Just by looking, Barrows recognizes the place, and Karnak confirms that it is the Zestrad family home, although something seems different. Karnak describes the place: a high brick wall, a 2-story building with a terrace and a large garden. He recognizes the place, but finds it strange that it is so well kept and decorated. He wonders where the money came from to make all these renovations. Then one of the guards recognizes them and calls Karnak, but the other guard quickly corrects him, saying not to call him that. They both bow and greet him as Lord. Karnak and Barrows are perplexed, wondering why they are being called Lord. In the next scene, someone informs them that it's been half a year since Karnak became the leader of the family. Karnak is shocked, thinking, half a year? Who explains all this is Tafel, the butler, who asks Karnak if he has achieved his goal. Karnak, unable to remember anything, replies with a hesitant yes. Tafel comments that Karnak's parents would be very proud to hear this, leaving both Karnak and Barrows in a state of shock, since they both knew that their parents had died. Tafel goes on to explain that after the deaths of Tessel and Farrell, the house was in chaos, but now things are better. Karnak reflects, thinking that this is apparently why he became the leader of the family, but he can't understand when or how it all happened. He knew that his parents had died in his previous life, and his goal on the journey was clear: to learn more about black magic and necromancy. Barrows whispers to Karnak that it doesn't make sense for that to have been the goal in the current timeline, and Karnak agrees. He comments that it would be strange to use necromancy if he were the lord of a wealthy family. Tafel, not noticing their discomfort, asks what they're worried about. Barrows, trying to disguise it, replies that the young master is just tired from the trip and that they need to rest. Taffel, all concerned, apologizes and quickly sends them to their room. As soon as the door closes, Karnak congratulates Barrows on a job well done, and Barrows replies with a simple "we." However, Barrows mentions that his main concern now is to find out what happened in this new timeline. Karnak says that there is a good method for situations like this. Barrows immediately understands what Karnak is talking about and suggests that they start preparations quickly, as they need to do this while everyone is asleep. In the next scene, it's night and we see Taffel, the butler, fast asleep. Barrows, watching, comments that he's sleeping like a stone. Barrows then hands Karnak a bowl, saying that all the herbs have already been prepared. Karnak decides to start the mental inspection. He uses black magic on the herbs, which begin to release a strange smoke, entering the butler's nose. Karnak orders him to wake up, and suddenly the butler awakens, still sleepwalking, with white eyes and says, "Yes, master." The first thing Karnak asks for is an explanation of how his family managed to reestablish itself financially and how he became lord. The butler, still under the spell, explains that while the second young master was training, he accidentally discovered a large copper mine. Karnak thinks to himself, "Copper mine? I always thought these mines were just excuses that nobles used to hide dirty money." Barrows comments that maybe that's true, but in this case it looks like they've actually found a real mine. Karnak then asks why everyone died, and the butler explains that the problem was the location of the copper mine. The mine was located in the neutrality zone between the Zestrad family and the Dentaire family, and both families claimed that the mine belonged to them. This conflict led to a war between the two families. The Dentaires had always been known for their rigorous military training, and there was no one who could defeat Sir Randolph of the Dentaires. It was he who killed Baron Carpu easily in battle, as well as murdering the young Master Tessel, the eldest son and best knight in the house. The second young master, Farrell, lost both his legs in battle with Sir Rodon and, unable to bear his situation, took his own life. After these tragedies, the Baroness was devastated and died shortly afterwards. In the end, Karnak, the young master, was chosen as the successor, even though he was the youngest son. The two families promised a ceasefire until he came of age and became the official head of the house. However, there was great concern about the copper mine and compensation for the war. Karnak then found a solution to save the family. He challenged Viscount Dentaire to a trial duel in the name of Alum, the goddess of the moon and justice. Hearing this, Karnak and Barrows are stunned. Barrows exclaims, "Wait a minute, a duel?" Karnak, surprised, doesn't believe it either. The butler goes on to explain that a trial duel is held under the mandates of the Order of Alum, where a warrior can be replaced, and the combat is decided only by the death of one side. Barrows comments that this was a big mistake and that Karnak has practically dug his own grave. Karnak also wonders why everyone loves him now, since this decision seems to be a losing fight. It seems that Viscount Dentaire didn't refuse the duel because it would ruin his image. If Karnak won the duel, he would secure the copper mine, saving his family from starvation. However, Barrows comments that with Karnak's current level of skill, he will surely die. Karnak replies that he must hurry to prepare, and asks the butler when the duel will be. The butler replies that it will be in a month's time. They both despair at the lack of time. In the next scene, we see a huge breakfast banquet. Barrows is completely shocked, asking Karnak what it's all about. Karnak, smiling, says that he has prepared everything especially for Barrows, because he has always worked so hard for him. Barrows, all happy, starts to eat, but Karnak then comments, "By the way, you can take my place in the duel." Barrows, with his mouth full, stops and apologizes, saying he's not going, and comments that he knew there was something wrong with that feast. Karnak, in disbelief, says, "What? You killed 3 of the 4 martial kings. How come you can't do that for me?" Barrows explains that everything he achieved was because of Karnak's necromancy. He comments that you can have all the theoretical knowledge about sword fighting, but without physical skill it's like fighting without arms. Barrows says that perhaps, with a year's training, he could face the duel, but a month is impossible. Karnak, annoyed, takes the bread from Barrows' hand and tells him to stop eating. Barrows asks why Karnak isn't simply looking for a talented knight in the Knight's Order. Karnak replies that if there were someone with such talent, he wouldn't be worrying about it now. He concludes that, all things considered, he has no choice but to use his necromancy. Barrows finally understands why Karnak learned necromancy, but Karnak reveals that there is a problem, since necromancy is forbidden. He asks Barrows if he remembers that moment in the past when they were both on the run. We then see a flashback, where several people are hunting the two protagonists, shouting that whoever captured the demon would be blessed by alum. Karnak explains that they managed to eliminate that group by stealth using necromancy. In the flashback, we see Karnak and Barrows being pursued, accused by the priests of using black magic. The knights call them demons for practicing necromancy, and Karnak remembers that the best way to deal with the situation was to use magic to erase the fates of the living by summoning the resentful spirits, the IRAs. The priests of Alum's order tried to defend themselves by raising their sacred relics, the guardian plates, which would ward off this kind of evil. But to their surprise, the relics don't work. The IRAs overcome the protection of Alum's blessing and start killing the priests. Karnak, impassive, continues his escape, killing everyone around him, and shouts for Barrows to run, as reinforcements are coming. Karnak wonders how they knew he was using necromancy, since the book said no one should know. Barrows suggests that perhaps mages, knights, and ordinary people wouldn't know, but priests would. Karnak, surprised, admits that he hadn't read between the lines in the book. Back in the present, Barrows laughs as he remembers that chaotic day and comments, "That was indeed a troubled day." Karnak agrees, saying, "It was the beginning of our legend." Barrows then says that he thinks he has understood the plan this time. Karnak reveals that the idea is to use necromancy stealthily while pretending to take part in a normal duel. However, he points out that the duel will be judged by priests, which would mean repeating the same mistake if he used necromancy in this way. Barrows suggests a solution: take the money and run. Karnak, however, rejects the idea, saying that it would be shameful, as all the family members he hated were already dead, but the people there were alive and perhaps deserved to be helped. Barrows, shocked, replied, "Are you really going to continue with this example of the good old patriarch?" He even jokes that while Karnak does this, he's going to prepare for his own funeral. Karnak, with a smile, asks Barrows to sit down and says that he has an idea that could be dangerous, but could work. In the next scene, in the North Fort of Dentaire, we see a training session of the Order of the Knights of Dentaire, which is coming to an end, with the knights taking a break. Sir Randolph appears, and a knight approaches him, asking how preparations are going for the trial duel. Randolph, mockingly, says, "What preparations? Against such a weak opponent, I don't need anything." The knight agrees, but warns Randolph not to let his guard down. Randolph, however, laughs and says that it's ridiculous to waste his time with a duel against a spoiled young master who knows nothing about the world. The other knight comments that although he doesn't believe Randolph will lose the duel, it's strange that the new lord has asked for the fight, suggesting that he may have some kind of plan. Suddenly, he notices a merchant nearby and comments that he has seen many outsiders in the neighborhood lately. He orders the guards to keep an eye out while the merchant tries to distract some women with his wares. When the scene focuses on the merchant, we discover that it's Barrows in disguise with a mustache. Barrows thinks it was a good idea to take a look at the place. He reflects that although Randolph might not be so formidable in a war, in one-on-one combat, his opponent really wouldn't stand a chance. However, Barrows concludes that Randolph is a fool who relies on traditional heavy sword techniques and, moreover, has not yet developed his own sword aura. Barrows thinks it's easy to predict the movements of opponents like Randolph, and that's good for him. However, he reflects that even so, a month is not enough time for Karnak to be prepared. Suddenly, a woman approaches, noticing that Barrows is acting strangely. She asks if he has business with his brother, Randolph. Barrows, disguised as a merchant, quickly replies, "Oh, so you're Randolph's younger sister?" She confirms and insists that he explain why he's watching his brother so closely. Barrows, still in disguise, says no, that he was just impressed by the vigor of the strongest knight in the north. Taking the opportunity to change the subject, he comments that it's a coincidence that she's there and suggests that she might need a scarf, offering one at a special price. The strategy works, as the woman is distracted by the scarves. Meanwhile, back at the Zestrad estate, in the personal training room, Barrows returns and asks Karnak how his endurance training is going. Karnak, on the floor and almost dead from exhaustion, can barely answer. Barrows, worried, picks him up and tries to wake him up. Karnak slowly asks him to stop shaking him, otherwise breakfast will come again. Barrows then asks if Karnak managed to run the 50 laps in the training room, as he had promised, and Karnak replies that he did, but that he fainted soon afterwards. Barrows comments that Karnak has little stamina, and Karnak, frustrated, asks why he is training so hard. Barrows explains that, with his skinny body, he won't be able to do anything in the duel. Karnak tries to argue, but soon admits that he needs to rest. However, Barrows doesn't like this at all, insisting that the real endurance training has only just begun. Karnak, surprised, asks if what he was doing wasn't training, but Barrows replies that it was just rehabilitation, a warm-up for the real challenge. With 20 days to go until the match, Barrows began to explain the training plan. The first rule is to eat a hearty breakfast with lots of meat and protein. Then Karnak goes into the training room and starts with 100 push-ups. Karnak, already exhausted, can barely stand. Then he does 100 swings with a training stick, simulating the use of a sword, followed by 100 squats. After that, a short break to eat more and then more push-ups, more sword swings, more squats. With 15 days left until the duel, Karnak was already in better shape, able to do squats with heavy bags on his shoulders. He was visibly more focused. Barrows appears and, impressed, comments that Karnak has finally developed some stamina. Karnak proudly admits that he has trained hard, although he still feels inferior to Barrows. Barrows jokes that he has done twice as much training as Karnak, but now it was time to train with swords. Karnak, excited, finally receives a sword from Barrows. After a few attempts, Barrows observes Karnak and says, "My God! What a mess!" He notices that Karnak's arms are shaking, his shoulders are tense, and his posture is all wrong. Barrows corrects him, telling him to relax his shoulders, put his weight on his heels, and bend his knees more. Karnak, tired, thinks that Barrows is too strict. Barrows then says that Karnak needs to maintain this posture to avoid being decapitated in a single blow. The training continues, with Barrows attacking Karnak so that he can learn to counterattack. But Barrows attacks with such force and speed that Karnak barely sees the blow and is hit with a huge impact. Barrows scolds him for losing his stance and orders him to try again. Karnak realizes that, at the moment, he can't counterattack, and the only thing he can do is try to maintain his posture. However, Barrows delivers a final blow that completely destroys Karnak's stance, leaving him lying on the ground. Barrows, seeing him on the ground, comments that this is why knights find it so easy to duel civilians. It's like taking candy from a child, as they don't give their opponents a chance to counterattack. He explains that Karnak needs to hold his position and dodge the next blows. Karnak admits that he understands, but worries that maintaining his stance will hinder his ability to dodge. Barrows reassures him, saying that they still have a lot of training ahead of them, and the aim is to show Randolph that Karnak has a real desire to fight. The protagonist begins to wonder if there is really any need to show so much stamina during the duel, and Barrows explains that Randolph has a habit of showing off to the audience, trying to impress the spectators while toying with his opponent. However, if his opponent loses the will to fight, a prolonged fight could damage Randolph's honor. For this reason, Barrows emphasizes that it is essential for Karnak to show determination and not give up, because only then will he have the chance to defeat Randolph with a single blow. In the next scene, with only 5 days to go until the big duel, we see Karnak already well-trained, carrying a shield, sword, and armor. He begins to attack Barrows with more confidence, managing to dodge basic blows and even using his shield to defend himself when he is caught off guard. However, when he is hit by a stronger blow, Karnak rolls away, falling awkwardly on his butt. Barrows scolds him, telling him not to even think about taking a blow from Randolph, otherwise he'll be torn to pieces. For days before the fight, Karnak was still struggling and ended up crying during the fight. 3 days before, he was already rolling more agilely, and 2 days before, he was managing to dodge better. He jokes that, with this intense training, he'll probably die before he even gets to the duel. Barrows, however, says that Karnak is almost ready and that now it was time to learn the final technique. Barrows reveals that he is going to teach Karnak the technique of the 4 martial kings. Karnak is surprised to discover that Barrows knows this kind of skill. Barrows explains that, as the 4 martial kings have become his subordinates, he has been able to learn their techniques with precision. He mentions that he learned all of them, except that of the martial king Rapsel, because Karnak never turned him into a death knight. Rapsel resisted to the end, so Karnak just severed his link with life, turning him into a palace guardian. Karnak, impressed, thinks, "Did I really do that? Was I really that cruel?" Barrows then explains that he's going to teach the martial king Levon's delicate sword technique. Karnak wonders if he can really learn it in 2 days, but Barrows reassures him by saying, "What do you mean 2 days? You only need 1. In the next scene, it's the day of the duel. On the border between the territories of Dentair and Zestrad, the crowd is gathered, betting on Randolph. Everyone seems to believe that it will be an easy fight for him, but some are speculating that perhaps Karnak has a chance, since he has been training hard. When Karnak appears, he comments to Barrows, "Come on, it's time." In the arena, there was a great murmur until a priest appeared to organize the crowd and called for silence in the name of Alum. He explains that the two houses are claiming ownership of the copper mines and have therefore requested a trial by combat. Ownership of the mine will be granted to the winner of the duel. The priest introduces Karnak of House Zestrad, who is defending himself for the mine, and Sir Randolph of Dentaire. Before the fight, according to the rules, a balance of equipment was applied based on the fighter's abilities. Randolph wore a wooden sword and no armor, while Karnak had his shield and sword. The priest asks if the fighters, in the name of Alum, promise to fight honestly. Both answer yes, and with the knight's oath, the duel begins. Randolph confidently charges at Karnak, claiming that the balance of equipment won't change the outcome. His blow is heavy, but Karnak manages to defend himself with his shield. He teases Randolph, saying that they won't know the result until the end. Randolph jokingly replies, "Oh, so you're not all talk?" and continues to unleash powerful attacks, while Karnak defends with his shield. The audience is beginning to be impressed by how well Karnak is doing in the fight. Barrows, watching from afar, thinks the start is going as expected. Randolph, at first, is not fast or threatening, as he is just analyzing his opponent. Karnak realizes that he must continue as trained. He needs to show his willingness to fight, so he shouts loudly, as he had practiced with Barrows, demonstrating his determination in front of everyone. Karnak teases Randolph, telling him to go for it, and Randolph is surprised to see the determination in Karnak's eyes. Despite his weak skills, he has a strong spirit. Randolph decides to raise the bar a little, and Karnak notices that Randolph's sword energy has increased, knowing that he won't be able to block with his shield. As the attack comes towards him, Karnak uses his super-fast rolling ability, managing to dodge it. Yes, it was the artwork itself that named the ability. Randolph is confused, not understanding what kind of skill this is, and even the audience is impressed by Karnak's dodge. The priests, who are watching the fight, comment that they have never seen anything like it. Karnak then throws the shield away, taunting Randolph that he's not strong enough to need to use it and calling Randolph a slow turtle and a muscle pig, which infuriates Randolph. He threatens to rip Karnak's mouth off so that he never speaks that kind of crap again, and Karnak taunts him further, saying, "Try your luck." When Randolph sees Karnak's stance, he is shocked, recognizing that it is a stance from Dad's martial arts, created by the martial king Levon. The audience is amazed to realize that Karnak was training a technique from one of the martial kings. Randolph tries to calm down, realizing that he almost fell for the provocation. He thinks that although Karnak is using an advanced technique, it can only be effective if the user has real combat experience, something he believes Karnak doesn't have. Randolph then decides that although Karnak's technique is impressive, it won't be enough to defeat him. He proclaims himself the new lord of House Zestrad and says that he will bring justice in the name of Aliun. Karnak, however, begins to doubt himself, unsure if he can really defeat Randolph. At this point, we see a flashback of Karnak talking to Barrows during training. Barrows was telling Karnak that he didn't need to master the technique completely, but just copy his movements. The idea was to impress the audience enough for them to believe that he was actually training. That was the real plan. Back in the present, Karnak is being beaten by Randolph and thinks, "Damn, Barrows never told me I'd be beaten like this." Nevertheless, Karnak continues to defend himself and realizes that he has to do whatever it takes. He begins to make an emotional speech to the people, crying and saying that Randolph's blows are nothing to someone from the Zestrad lineage. Randolph, on the other hand, thinks that Karnak is an idiot as he is being beaten while making the speech. The audience, however, falls for Karnak's performance and starts to get emotional along with him. Everyone is impressed by his determination, despite being defeated. Barrows, watching from afar, smiles, noticing that Karnak isn't taking any vital blows. He thinks that all this time Karnak is spending being beaten up is actually an advantage for their plan. Randolph, angry, realizes that continuing to beat Karnak is damaging his honor. He decides to end the fight once and for all and sets off quickly towards Karnak. Barrows, watching, realizes that their plan is about to work. He warns Karnak that this is the moment, and Karnak remembers Barrows' words. "Even if you can only imitate the movements and perform a proper blow, everyone will believe that you have really trained." Randolph advances with great speed, as Barrows predicted, and Karnak does as he was instructed. He switches to a defensive position and drives his sword into the ground, blocking Randolph's attack impressively. Randolph, shocked, wonders if the newcomer really managed to block his blow. Barrows, satisfied, says that the next step is to spin Karnak's sword upwards in a diagonal arc. The pressure of Karnak's attack increases on Randolph, who is forced to block with difficulty. Barrows had already instructed Karnak to quickly change the grip of his sword and strike again, but this time in the opposite direction. The blow hits Randolph square in the chest, causing him to bleed. However, Karnak is exhausted after these attacks, and Randolph starts laughing, mocking, "Is that all you've got? A little scratch on the chest." He compares the blow to the scratch of a kitten. Karnak realizes that the situation is not good, and the audience also begins to lose faith, commenting that Randolph has already won the fight. Many stop believing, muttering that miracles don't exist. Randolph teases Karnak, saying that he has let his guard down and that his companions will mock him if he gets out of that situation alive. Karnak replies that he is there risking his life, while Randolph only cares about his honor. But Karnak makes it clear that he won't feel sorry for Randolph when his plan is completed. Just then, something strange begins to happen to Randolph's wound. Black flames emerge from the wound and expand rapidly. The priests and guards of the Church of Aliyun become alarmed, watching carefully. Randolph tries to fight the flames, but Karnak, feigning surprise, teases, "No matter what your plan, I will defeat you." He lunges at Randolph, but is actually controlling Randolph's body with his necromantic abilities. Randolph, with no control over his own body, kicks Karnak with superhuman force, knocking him away. The audience, perplexed, begins to suspect that something is wrong. Barrows, following the plan, accuses Randolph of being a necromancer, claiming that he is using the power of the devil. The priests agree and set out to capture Randolph, believing him to be practicing black magic. Randolph, desperate, tries to defend himself against the priests and guards of Aliyun, but it is Karnak who is controlling his movements. Chaos ensues, with Randolph fighting the priests, who believe he is using necromancy. Confused, Randolph wonders what Karnak has done to him. Karnak, for his part, thinks that Randolph must be completely disoriented, and perhaps he has caused a bigger scene than planned. Karnak then snaps his fingers, and a dark cloak begins to envelop Randolph's body, limiting his movements. The guards and priests assume that Randolph is being controlled by a curse, and one of the priests comments that he may be an inexperienced necromancer, so the situation is getting out of hand. Everyone moves forward, believing they have found a loophole in Randolph's abilities. In fact, it was Karnak who purposely imprisoned Randolph to facilitate his defeat. As Randolph struggles to escape, he is severely wounded in the stomach by the priests of Aliyun, spitting up blood. When the dark cloak finally disappears, Randolph is completely impaled by the priest's weapons, falling dead in the middle of the arena. With Randolph dead, the guards are uncertain what to do with the body. One of the priests suggests sending it for examination and research. He also declares that the outcome of the fight has already been decided. Randolph has been disqualified for using black magic, and the winner obviously is Karnak. In the next scene, at Viscount Zestrad's estate, priests are investigating and find various proofs of necromancy, such as cloaks and symbols scattered throughout the estate. Randolph's sister tries to defend her brother, arguing that he wasn't responsible for it, and that many of the objects were recently bought from a street vendor. However, a priest finds a suspicious vial in Randolph's room and asks about its purpose. The sister explains that it's just a hair growth formula, something Randolph used because he was worried about his baldness. But the priest insists that this is even more evidence that Randolph was involved in necromancy, and informs her that a hearing will be held soon. Days later, back at Zestrad's estate, Karnak and Barrows are celebrating with a feast. Karnak praises the food, saying that it is infinitely better than what they ate during their training. They agree that they deserve the meal, as they are celebrating a victory. Barrows, intrigued, asks how Karnak managed to perform that particular spell during the duel. Karnak reveals that he did what was necessary to win, explaining that success was only possible because of Randolph's pride. A month earlier, when they were discussing the plan, Karnak had told Barrows that he intended to use necromancy during the fight. Barrows was worried, fearing that this would make him easy to detect, but Karnak assured him that there was a plan. He explained that dying in the necromancy trial or being defeated in the duel made no difference, so he preferred to take the risk. However, the real plan was to make Randolph be seen as the necromancer, not him. Barrows, curious, asks what Karnak has in mind, and Karnak replies that he will have to put the plan into practice to see if it works. He warns that he will have to be very careful, as the priests can identify necromancy, so during the fight he will have to shout and accuse Randolph of using the spell, and not him. Karnak explains that he will be using an extremely powerful necromancy spell, but since everyone doubts his abilities, no one will suspect that he is responsible. Barrows, hearing this, comments that there's not much to worry about in this case. But Karnak points out that the plan will only work if there are no problems, because in order to perform the spell, the opponent needs to spit blood or be wounded enough for blood to come out of his body. Barrows then asks, "Oh, so you just have to make him bleed?" Karnak, remembering his training, replies in exasperation, "You've put me through a lot for that." Barrows laughs and says it was worth it. Barrows also notes that there is something strange about all this, as Randolph would never have needed to use necromancy, since he was stronger than Karnak in hand-to-hand combat. Yet somehow they escaped without arousing suspicion, and the Zestrad are now being investigated. Barrows wonders why the priests are so convinced that Randolph really did use necromancy. Meanwhile, in the Great Temple of the Order of Alioun, a high priest is talking to the priest who supervised the duel. The superior asks if he has completed his investigation into the Zestrad's dark powers, as there is a lot of commotion surrounding the case and he only wants facts, not suppositions. The priest, kneeling, replies that, according to their investigations, they are sure of what happened. He states that the power used was not that of an ordinary necromancer, but of someone using a fragment of the transcendent. He goes on to explain that the goddess warned that these attributes correspond perfectly to the darkness of the apocalypse. Back at the Zestrad estate, Karnak reflects that luck is on his side this time, while Barrows celebrates, "At last, the world is in our favor." Karnak comments that all they need to do now is make the most of life. Walking down the corridor, Barrows asks about the Zestrad family and comments that, with everything that has happened, many powers will try to take control of the mines. Karnak agrees, saying that many will try to take advantage of this breach, and that's why he's going to strengthen his necromancy even more. Barrows is alarmed, worried that the Order of Alioun will find out again, but Karnak is already thinking of ways to use his necromancy covertly. 3 months later, in the territory of Zestrad, Karnak is inside a magic circle, meditating. He is extremely focused, feeling the mana flowing through his body. He summons the corrupt energy from the darkness of the night, filtering it until he can extract only pure energy. After much effort, he finally completes the spell, exclaiming, "Perfect! This finally worked. This is the magic of chaos." The next day, we see Barrows dueling with someone. He thinks about the last 3 months, during which he started training like a soldier, aiming to become an official knight of Zestrad. The problem, however, is that he finds his opponent's skills pathetic. That opponent is Jiraman, a senior soldier. Barrows reflects, but is interrupted by Jiraman, who asks him to end the training for today. Barrows, not understanding, thanks him for the time, while Jiraman, embarrassed, thinks that he should actually be learning from Barrows. Jiraman comments that Barrows has grown a lot in recent times and will soon be the most powerful knight in Zestrad. However, Barrows, being modest, says that he still has a long way to go. Jiraman invites him to have a drink with the other soldiers, but Barrows refuses, explaining that he has been assigned an important task by Karnak. They say goodbye, promising to see each other the next day. Later, Barrows appears calling Karnak for a snack, but Karnak launches an explosion in his direction, forcing Barrows to desperately dodge, knocking over the tea tray. Karnak, irritated, asks him to knock on the door before entering. Barrows, confused, asks what that technique was, as it didn't seem to be necromancy. Karnak smiles and says that Barrows has become so used to seeing necromancy that he can now recognize it. He then explains that what he used was pure mana. Barrows asks how Karnak manages to use pure mana and wonders about the different types of power. The narrator explains that, in this world, there are 4 ways to transcend human strength. The first is the battle aura of warriors, the second is the mana of mages, the third is the divine energy of clerics, and the fourth is the strength of necromancers, who use darkness and death. This transcendent force accumulates energy suited to the body, and when a sufficient amount is gathered, it is transformed into power, optimized for what best suits the user's soul and body. Barrows comments that once you've chosen a type of power, there's no changing it, and Karnak explains that he hasn't changed his power, he's just reached the second stage. Barrows is curious if necromancy can really evolve, and Karnak clarifies that necromancy uses the energy of death and corrupt energy, which is impure mana. Karnak reveals that, due to his poor upbringing, he was able to cope well with this energy, comparing it to food that is made using unpleasant methods, such as fermentation. He uses the metaphor of cheese to explain that necromancy can be processed and refined, filtering out negative emotions such as hatred and resentment, leaving only the pure energy of darkness and death. He then transforms this energy into pure mana, creating the mana of chaos. Barrows notes that, at first glance, this mana looks like normal mana, but when he looks more closely, he notices the difference. Karnak reassures Barrows that he can pretend to be a wizard for now. Barrows, however, gets worried, asking if Karnak won't lose power by using the mana of chaos, which may not be as powerful as necromancy. Karnak replies, saying that with great powers come great responsibilities, and that he only needs enough power to protect his territory. Meanwhile, in the western forest of Zestrad territory, Knights of the Order are hunting monstrous wolves near the copper mines. After finishing his work, one of the guards is attacked by a wolf that is still alive. Before the guard can react, Barrows appears and saves the day by cutting the wolf's neck. He asks Jiraman if everything is all right, and Jiraman thanks him for saving him, saying that with this proof, Barrows is now an official knight. Barrows, however, comments that he still feels ashamed to have recently become an official knight. Looking at the dead wolves, he asks if Jiraman had mentioned that the monsters were acting strangely. Jiraman confirms, saying that the monsters have become twice as strong in recent days, and mentions the rumor of the divine oracle. Barrows, confused, asks about the oracle, and Jiraman explains that the oracle predicts destruction. The 7 goddesses who protect the world and humanity have sent a message that the void will open its mouth and spew out a fate that is not allowed. This will mark the beginning of an era of darkness, where life will be taken and monsters and the dead will gain wrong powers, culminating in the arrival of the King of Death, who will bring blood and tears to the world. Barrows, worried, reports all this to Karnak, who is also shocked. They discuss the oracle, and Barrows comments that it didn't exist before they went back in time. He wonders why their past is changing so much. Karnak agrees, frustrated by the lack of information. Barrows raises the possibility that Karnak could be the King of Death mentioned in the oracle, but Karnak refutes this, explaining that the oracle chronologically took place long before their time travel. Barrows, increasingly panicked, wonders if the incident with Randolph could have escalated because of the oracle and fears that the world could collapse. Karnak, on the other hand, wonders what 2 country nobles like them could do against such a great force. He recalls that he tried to destroy the world before but failed. Barrows comments that there are many heroes out there, and Karnak agrees that perhaps humanity will find a solution on its own. He concludes that they should concentrate on protecting Zestrad's territory and enjoying life. 7 days later, a guest arrives in Zestrad's territory. The man belongs to the Order of the Sun Goddess, Rachel, and asks for the territory's cooperation in a cause. Barrows and Karnak are shocked and sit down to discuss the situation. The emissary of the Order of the Sun explains that they have discovered a necromancer active in the city of Durf, who has fled to Zestrad and is hiding in a nearby forest. He therefore asks for the help of a guide who knows the ways of the forest well. Barrows, nervous, thinks that they should refuse the offer, but Karnak calmly puts the cup of tea on the table and says that he couldn't reject a request related to a goddess. He says that, of course, he will help the order and send someone quickly. Barrows, not understanding what Karnak is planning, just watches. The emissary of the Order of Rachel thanks him for his cooperation, but as soon as he leaves the room, Barrows approaches Karnak and asks what that was all about. He recalls that he heard from Karnak himself that they would not intervene in world affairs of this kind. Karnak calmly replies that they don't need to intervene directly, but that this is a good opportunity to get information and understand what is going on. Barrows, still confused, asks what Karnak intends to do now, and Karnak, with a psychotic look and breaking the cup in his hand, says that they are going to capture this necromancer before the Order of the Sun and finish him off. In the next scene, at night, in the forest, we see a man running, trying to escape his pursuers. He thinks that perhaps he has managed to lose them and reflects on how the church dogs give him no rest. The necromancer regrets his situation, believing that he could finally stop living like a beggar, but realizes that he is still being hunted. He just wanted to survive and get his revenge. Suddenly, a light blinds him and someone confronts him, telling him that his end has come and that he will pay for his crimes. The necromancer realizes that he has fallen into a trap and that there is no escape. The guards of the Order of Rachel order him to surrender, but the necromancer, mocking them, replies that they are fools if they think he will give in so easily. He then begins to release his necromantic aura, summoning evil spirits, and the guards defend themselves with holy amulets. Meanwhile, Karnak and Barrows are watching from above. Karnak disdainfully comments that the situation is escalating and that they have a good place to watch. However, Karnak is annoyed to see the necromancer using necromancy techniques incorrectly. Barrows agrees, saying that the necromancer clearly hasn't learned properly. They both decide it's time to intervene. Coincidentally, the necromancer tries to escape, and the protagonists spring into action. In the next scene, we see the necromancer hiding in a cave. The necromancer, exhausted, regrets having spent more power than he expected and plans to hide until he recovers his energy. When he arrives at the cave, he finds Karnak and Barrows already camped there. Barrows jokingly says that he was worried about the necromancer being late. Karnak comments that this place is usually their hiding place. The necromancer, shocked, asks who they are, and Karnak replies that they are the ones who have come to capture him. The necromancer, panicked, summons more necromantic spirits to try to distract them and buy time to escape, believing that they wouldn't know how to deal with such spirits. Barrows, however, comments that there are only a few spirits that he can easily cut with his sword, but Karnak asks him to relax, as he wants to test his chaotic mana. The necromancer runs desperately out of the cave, believing he has managed to lose them both, but soon a huge explosion occurs at the cave entrance. Karnak, calm, asks, "Are you running somewhere?" and uses an ability to pin the spirits to the ground, causing them to explode. The necromancer, in a panic, begins to realize that Karnak is much more powerful than he imagined and that he will probably be captured. Even so, he decides not to give up and summons a powerful evil spirit. Barrows comments that the necromancer really does have a lot of energy, but Karnak, annoyed, corrects him. Why is he calling it an evil spirit? It's just anger. The necromancer, convinced of his victory, believes he can see the fear on the faces of Karnak and Barrows. However, Karnak is offended by the statement and faces the invoked wrath directly. When the wrath is about to strike, Karnak simply orders it to kneel, and the creature obeys, prostrating itself on the ground. The necromancer, astonished, asks if Karnak is a necromancer, to which Karnak replies, "You only just found out? What an idiot." He then invokes a different kind of magic, creating a huge claw that manifests itself on the necromancer. Karnak explains, "This is my specialty," and the claw grabs the necromancer tightly, binding him for good. After a while, the necromancer is already unconscious, and Karnak uses his magic to probe his mind. He orders the necromancer to wake up and obey, to which the necromancer automatically replies, "Yes, master." Karnak then asks how he obtained his powers as a necromancer. The necromancer explains that it was pure luck. He was wandering the streets, drowning in his sorrows, when a darkness from an alley enveloped him. An unknown power began to flow through his body, resembling an authority of the apocalypse, as foretold by the prophecy. With so much power at his disposal, he didn't hesitate to take it. Acquiring these powers, he quickly grew stronger and killed everyone he hated, invading mansions and spreading chaos. Before he can continue, Karnak interrupts, visibly disappointed, telling Barrows that the necromancer was a nobody. Barrows then asks if Karnak intends to control his mind or use the necromancer's own knife against him. Karnak replies that they need to clear the area and, after killing the necromancer with his own knife, begins to absorb the necromantic energy from the body. Barrows, worried, asks why Karnak is absorbing this dirty energy, since he should avoid something so impure. Karnak, however, explains that he wants to analyze this energy further and that a search party is about to arrive, so they need to act quickly so as not to arouse suspicion. Suddenly, Karnak seems shocked by something. As Barrows asks if everything is all right, they hear the shouts of the Holy Order soldiers approaching. Karnak, still surprised, simply comments that there is something strange about this energy. Days later, at Zestrad's residence, Karnak creates a magical sound barrier, and Barrows asks why the conversation would be so serious as to need a barrier. Karnak, in a calm tone, says it's a simple thing to do. He then reveals that he has analyzed the power he absorbed from the necromancer and tells Barrows that he has discovered the cause of everything. Barrows, confused, asks what he has discovered, and Karnak replies, "I am the cause." Barrows is even more perplexed, saying that this doesn't make sense according to the timeline they're in now. Karnak agrees that he doesn't fully understand either, but explains that the power he analyzed is exactly the same as his own. He asks if Barrows remembers the time they chose regression over possession, because the bodies they had couldn't withstand the spiritual power they carried. They had to give up part of their power and separate their souls to return to their original bodies, avoiding death. Karnak then theorizes that when he transcended into Astra Schnaf, he left his living body and used energy to create something that was neither a body nor a complete spirit. He believes that his powers of necromancy were linked to the spirit and not the body, which may have caused his spiritual power to cross over into the past along with his soul. The body, unable to handle so much power, must have released this energy, which spread throughout the world. Barrows, now desperate, asks if Karnak's power has really been brought back to the past. Karnak confirms and explains that this dispersed energy has become the darkness of the apocalypse. Barrows, worried, comments that his peaceful life is over because, even dispersed, this energy could be enough to destroy the world. He asks Karnak if there is a plan or if he can simply call the power back. Karnak, with a serious look on his face, replies with a metaphor. If you throw several coins into the street, will they come back to you by any chance? Frustrated, Barrows says that everything is going wrong because of Karnak, and Karnak reflects that they can't trust the power of this world, because he's done it before and everyone knows how it ended. Barrows asks what they will do now, as he was prepared for a quiet life, but it seems that won't be the case. Karnak says that the first step is to find out where the other parts of his power are. Barrows, resigned, comments that they will go back to living out of hostels and sleeping bags, but Karnak promises that at least he will be well fed. In the next scene, the two are leaving Zestrad's territory on horseback. Barrows comments that, despite the situation, this isn't so bad because, at least in this life, when they leave the territory, they aren't chased. However, he also notices that something is strange, since there are no signs of bandits, something that was very common before. Karnak comments that the bandits haven't disappeared, they just don't attack them anymore because they are now influential people in this life. Barrows, agreeing, says that the money is really good, but reminds them that they didn't leave with the intention of training in magic, but to go to Durf. Karnak confirms this, explaining that the last necromancer they captured obtained his powers there, so there must be clues about his dispersed power in the region. Barrows, still skeptical, comments that Karnak's plan seems a little fragile and that the darkness won't just come to them after all. He asks if Karnak has some kind of tracking magic. Karnak, with a smile, replies that no, they'll do it the old-fashioned way. He then asks if Barrows remembers where they used to go. In the next scene, they arrive at the Adventurers Guild in Durf, where Karnak comments that this is the best place to get information, since all kinds of rumors circulate there. Barrows reminds them that, in the past, they managed to forge their identities as adventurers and that, once again, the guild is proving useful. Karnak agrees and says that this time they will also have to register as adventurers. As they enter the guild, which has a refined and comfortable atmosphere, the receptionist greets them with a bag full of coins, asking if they have come to get information about the dark fragments of the apocalypse. Barrows, indignant, mutters about how this man doesn't seem to care about the monsters that plague the land. Karnak, on the other hand, asks for as many details as possible, and the receptionist begins to search the archives. He comments that there have been a lot of requests related to the shadows of the apocalypse recently, which means that there is a lot of accumulated information. The receptionist then places a pile of documents on the table, and Karnak and Barrows begin to analyze them. However, after a quick read-through, they both realize that many of the reports are false or exaggerated, blaming the shadows of the apocalypse for trivial incidents, such as a dog eating a chicken or a woman running away. The receptionist, noticing this, asks if he can remove the useless information, but Karnak refuses, saying that the more information, the better. When Barrows tries to argue, Karnak puts his hand on his shoulder and uses telepathy magic, called magic message, to communicate without attracting attention. Karnak explains that important information is sometimes hidden among apparently useless documents, but Barrows, still worried, comments that this will take much longer than he expected. Suddenly, someone comes into the guild shouting, asking why no one believes him. The man runs up to the reception desk, saying that there is an evil necromancer in the city and that he needs to report it. The receptionist calmly asks him if he's been to the temple to report it, but the man replies that even the temple didn't believe him. The receptionist then asks him to explain the situation. The man begins to tell his story. Some time ago, a foreigner called Cleo arrived in town and took up residence in an abandoned mansion. Although he was young, he seemed very wealthy and organized constant festivals to win the sympathy of the inhabitants. In addition, he seduced several young women in the town, including the man's own fiancée, using what he believed to be a magical ability. The others in the guild start laughing, commenting that Cleo just looks like a handsome, popular young man, and that this has nothing to do with necromancy. The receptionist also says that he can't accept this as an official report, but suggests that the man pay to hire an adventurer, which ends up frustrating the man when he sees the prices. He leaves the guild in a rage, accusing everyone of being a fraud. As the commotion calms down, Karnak, a little discouraged, comments that they haven't achieved anything useful that day. Barrows suggests they go to a famous restaurant nearby, and Karnak agrees. As they leave, the receptionist promises to contact them if he receives any new useful information. As soon as they leave the guild and enter an alley, Barrows comments that this Cleo is very suspicious. Karnak agrees, and Barrows wonders why a young, rich man would choose a small, remote town to live in. Karnak replies that there is only one reason for this. He is probably using the innocent young women of the countryside as sacrifices for black magic rituals, and he is probably after the souls of virgins. Karnak and Barrows realize that they need to go quickly to find this Cleo. After some time, in the late afternoon, they arrive in the city. Karnak immediately senses something strange about the place, noticing the presence of a very well-made barrier that covers the entire city. He comments that even a high-ranking priest would have difficulty detecting it, which indicates that the necromancer responsible must be very skilled. Karnak says that, although it could just be a simple barrier, they need to check whether Cleo is part of the darkness of the apocalypse, but points out that he could also just be an ordinary necromancer. Suddenly, someone calls out to them, and as they look, they see a priest running towards them. They wonder what a priest is doing there. The man introduces himself as Alias, a level 1 inquisitor of the Earth Order, servant of Hatoba. Karnak, recognizing the importance of a level 1 priest, keeps his composure while Barrows nervously introduces himself, learning from Karnak how to use the title of Baron of the land of Zestrad and Knight of the family. The priest looks confused, asking if they are not adventurers and what brings them to the city. Karnak explains that they heard strange rumors and decided to investigate. Alias, sensing the opportunity, whispers that he might need a favor, in the name of God, of course. Barrows, intrigued, asks what this is about, and the priest confesses that he believes there is a necromancer hiding in the city. Karnak and Barrows, shocked, wonder why he has come alone. Alias explains that the order won't do anything until they have concrete proof, as many false reports are currently circulating. Karnak comments that the town's situation already seems strange enough to arouse suspicion, but Alias explains that it's easy for someone to be considered rich and handsome in a small town, which may not mean much. The priest continues, explaining that this is why he is investigating alone. He looks at Barrows, observing his physique and equipment, and comments that he seems to be well-trained, suggesting that they could solve this problem for him. Karnak and Barrows exchange glances, and through the magical message, Karnak comments on how annoying this is, saying that they will accompany the priest for now, but that they will do their own checks later. Barrows, worried, points out that the priest might discover that Karnak is a necromancer. Karnak responds indifferently, saying that if that happens, he will simply erase the poor man's memories, but Barrows reminds him that no one has come out mentally intact after Karnak used that spell. Karnak then agrees to help, saying that everyone is a child of God. The priest is happy and invites them to accompany him to the town church. They follow a dirt road and, on arriving at the large local church, are greeted by Grass, the church warden, and the nun Julia. After a few questions, Grass promptly states that Cleo has no involvement with necromancy. He explains that Cleo is a great help to the city and even mentions that a priest came by to talk to Cleo, but left without any problems. He regrets that Karnak and the priest came for nothing. Alias, keeping his cool, replies that sometimes it's good that the visit is unnecessary, as it means that no one is in danger. Grass offers them a room to rest from their trip, and they accept. Meanwhile, in a scene focusing on Cleo, we see that he is protected by a powerful magical barrier. Cleo's butler informs him that someone else from the Holy Order has come to investigate. Cleo, irritated, orders the butler to watch the intruder's steps closely and to inform him of any suspicious behavior. Angrily, Cleo cracks the cup in his hand, revealing his hatred for the Holy Order. In the next scene, in the guest room, Karnak takes advantage of a moment of privacy to talk to the priest. He comments that even the people in the church seem to have a very positive opinion of Cleo, which suggests that the whole town may have been fooled by this man. The priest, Alias, comments that there's no point in questioning the townspeople about Cleo, as they won't provide any useful information. He says that the only way is to find Cleo himself personally. Karnak, suspicious, asks if the plan is simply to knock on Cleo's door and interrogate him, but Alias replies that he has a much more effective method and will need their help. In the next scene, at night, in Cleo's mansion, we see Cleo approaching a maid, who asks where he is going at that time. Cleo replies that she is going to check on some unwanted guests who have arrived in town, telling her not to worry and to rest. As he walks away, Cleo thinks that his incantations have worked perfectly on her and reflects on how weak the human mind is. He is proud that it has taken him almost half a year to prepare everything and summon the demon, believing that his efforts will finally bring results. Cleo is confident that the barrier he has placed on the property will detect the intruders, and he heads out to confront them. Turning into the hallway, he finds the protagonists disguised as thieves, stealing paintings from the house. The priest Alias gives an impressive performance, saying, "Damn, we've been caught. Are you the master of this place?" Karnak, getting in on the joke, says, "You must be making a lot of money. Could you share some of it with us?" Cleo, thinking they are just thugs, laughs at the situation. The two continue with their interpretation, asking why he was laughing and threatening to teach him a lesson. However, Cleo simply invokes a spell, saying that they are so insignificant that they don't even serve as sacrifices. When the magic is cast, a divine barrier protects Karnak and the others, which makes Cleo realize that her opponents are using divine magic. At that moment, the disguises fall away. Barrows comments that he didn't expect Cleo to reveal her identity so easily, while Alias boasts that his method is effective. Cleo realizes that he was reckless to attack, but decides that now he has no choice but to get rid of them. He summons all the undead in the territory, forming a horde to attack the protagonists. Alias says he will take care of Cleo, while Karnak and Barrows take on the undead. Barrows advances, defeating several at once, while Karnak uses his chaos magic to finish them off. Desperate, Cleo decides to use his trump card and summons a beast from the underworld, materializing a huge tower of magic in the middle of the fight. From it emerges a demonic knight. Cleo confidently claims that they won't be able to defeat her demon. However, Alias uses Hatoba's light to disperse all the undead and demons on the field, reversing the summoning and making the enemies disappear. Meanwhile, he approaches Cleo, saying that he already knew he would use this ability. Cleo, furious, reveals his true form, transforming into an older, demonic version of himself. The priest, surprised, realizes that he has no spell to counteract this transformation, but Karnak and Barrows quickly intervene. Barrows attacks the demon with several cuts, while Karnak casts powerful spells that seriously injure him. After an intense battle, they manage to defeat the demon. The priest Alias, impressed by their strength and synergy, is speechless. While Karnak and Barrows discuss the fight, commenting that it was a good warm-up, the demon begins to regenerate. Barrows asks if he can finish him off, but Alias decides to deal with him. Using his divine energy, the priest purifies Cleo, removing the evil energy from her body and storing it in a container. He confirms that what was inside Cleo were shadows of the apocalypse and begins to prepare a report for the church. However, before he can continue, Karnak knocks him out with a swift blow to the neck. He asks Barrows if now is the time to start the real plan. After some time analyzing the darkness that had been taken from Cleo, Barrows impatiently asks if Karnak has found anything interesting. Karnak replies that, in fact, Cleo has always been a necromancer, but simply took the opportunity to absorb some of the darkness of the apocalypse. Barrows comments that the power is really tempting, but he feels there's more to the story. Karnak explains that Cleo was not only a necromancer, but also a member of a cult called Tez Rank. Karnak mentions that Tez Rank is considered the god of death, but Barrows, confused, asks, "Hey, I thought you were the god of death. It's not like it's a title anyone can take." Karnak agrees, but admits that he's not sure of all the details either. He explains that, according to the cult's gospel, Tez Rank is the god of death and rebirth, an entity who will purify the world through death to create a new paradise. Barrows, shocked, comments, "Cultists then." Karnak agrees and ponders that Tez Rank, or whoever he is, could be the reason behind all this. Despite the information, Karnak reveals that he has obtained more than just details about the cult. He mentions that, with the power of the priest asleep in front of them, he can easily refine his chaos mana. Barrows, intrigued, asks why he necessarily needs to be a priest. Karnak replies that chaos mana, when purified and sealed, can be combined with divine power, which makes it even easier to purify chaos mana. Barrows, surprised, says, "Oh, so that's why you wanted to help this guy." Karnak bluntly confirms, saying that his mana has doubled and he is now in the fourth magic circle. Suddenly, the priest wakes up and Karnak feigns concern. "Dude, are you okay? Are you okay?" Their act seems to work because the priest, believing he has been caught in a trap by the demon, doesn't suspect a thing. The next morning, the priest thanks them for their help and, even though he is still suspicious, believes that everything ended well. He mentions that the people enchanted by Cleo's influence seem confused, but that, with the church's help, everything will return to normal. Karnak and Barros say goodbye, going their separate ways, with the priest blessing them with the power of Hatoba. Even as he says goodbye, the priest is not entirely convinced and decides that he will investigate more about Karnak and Barros. In the next scene, on the outskirts of the city of Durf, we see Karnak and Barros drowning a necromancer in a basin of holy water. The necromancer confesses to being a practitioner of necromancy, begging to know what they want to know about magic. Karnak, however, is more interested in purifying the dark energy of the apocalypse from the man's body than in his answers. While the necromancer is being purified, Karnak comments that Hatoba really helped a lot in this task. Barros, meanwhile, mentions that he will contact the Order to cleanse the city and is surprised at how much Alias needed their help. Karnak replies that, although the Order will investigate them eventually, all they will find out is that he lost his family to the necromancers, making him the ideal hunter. He notes that they are dealing with several important cases and earning a lot of money and holy relics in return. Barros, tired, asks if it's time to go home yet, but Karnak says not yet. Barros, exhausted, asks if he intends to collect every bit of power scattered that day, but Karnak explains that he is only blocking the paths through which the power spreads. He theorizes that the power is being dispersed through time gates and is investigating the conditions for these gates to appear. Suddenly, a letter drops through the door. Karnak wonders if the Order of Hatoba has contacted him yet, and the letter reveals that Alias wants to speak to them personally. In the next scene, in the Temple of Hatoba, Alias welcomes them with great enthusiasm, happy to see them, and mentions that he has two people he would like to introduce to the protagonists. Alias introduces Karnak and Barros' two new allies, Liltine, a sixth circle mage, and Sarati, a swordswoman famous for being an aura user who awakened her martial energy at the age of 20. Telepathically, Karnak and Barros start talking. Karnak comments, Sarati is that aura user who awakened her martial energy at the age of 20. She's quite famous in Indon, isn't she? Barros replies, yes, and that man called Liltine is also a very advanced magician. The book then explains the classification of mages and martial energy users. The more circles a mage has, the more advanced the spells he can use. A great 10th circle mage completely transcends human limits. Karnak thinks to himself that he can reach that level, he just needs more mana. The explanation continues, showing that aura users are classified according to the purity of their energy into levels: red, blue, purple, silver, and gold. Becoming a golden knight is a rare feat, achieved only by the 4 martial kings. Liltine is currently a 6th circle mage, while Sarati is a red knight, which makes them powerful reinforcements. Karnak then asks Barros, you've never learned to use martial energy, have you? Barros replies, no, but I've already exchanged blows with the 4th martial king. The new allies greet Karnak and Barros formally. Sarati admits to being surprised by Karnak and Barros' achievements, since they were the only ones capable of capturing so many necromancers in a short period of time. Alias then interrupts the conversation and begins to explain why he has brought everyone together. They sit around a table to discuss the problems emerging in the city of Trist, which is located between the kingdoms of Yustal and Tarim. Due to its strategic location for trade, the city has expanded rapidly, but this growing wealth has led to crime syndicates taking control. 2 crime families, the Ranpelt and the Flad, began fighting for control of the city. The conflict persisted for decades, until the Flad gained the upper hand by allying themselves with necromancers, which led the Order of Hatoba to intervene after the Ranpelt reported the Flad's use of necromancy. However, the Ranpelt were also accused of using necromancy, although they hid it very well. Sarati, shocked, asks, so they both committed the same crime, and the Order didn't know about it? Alias replies that it is difficult to identify the traces of the darkness of the apocalypse, especially when 2 families use similar techniques. Karnak and Barros listen attentively, and Alias concludes by saying that now, with the revelation that both sides are involved in necromancy, the situation has become more complicated. Tension grows as everyone ponders how to deal with the 2 criminal sides that are plunged into the darkness of the apocalypse, and Karnak realizes that this mission may be even more challenging than it seems. Barros was thinking, that sounds a bit familiar. Karnak slapped the table and said, those suckers, they have to burn in hellfire. They're not even human, they're just creatures. Barrows thought that Karnak didn't have the slightest bit of shame in his face. Then Barrows said, "The reputation of the Order of Atoba is at stake with this, so it must be done very discreetly." Alias replied that this was exactly why they had called everyone together discreetly and explained that, if they failed there, they could cause problems in capturing necromancers in the future. They decided that they would disguise themselves and infiltrate the city before taking any action. Someone asked why he hadn't sent members of his order to do this, to which Alias admitted, embarrassed, that information had been leaked from within the order. The previous group they sent to the Ranpelt disappeared without a trace, even though they were skilled adventurers. Alias suspected that it was Bishop Shutraf, a high-ranking priest who had helped the Ranpelt purge the Flad, who was behind it. Karnak assumed that Alias hadn't informed the rest of the order about the plan, and Alias confirmed, "I'm doing this on my own because I have enough authority to do so. I intend to report it after everything is done, because we need definitive proof of the Ranpelt's use of necromancy." Sildella warned that this could be dangerous, as the whole city could turn against them, and Alias agreed, explaining that this was why he trusted the power of everyone at the table. In the next scene, in an underground chamber of the Ranpelt mansion, the situation was critical. Several people were tied up, tortured, and dead. A group in disguised hoods were walking around, and one of them commented that it had been a long time since the request had been sent. He asked another if he thought it was time for them to act again, to which the other replied that, if so, he would welcome them. After all, they were just sending him more sacrifices. This man was Bishop Shutraf, who used necromantic magic to absorb the victim's life energy and death energy. One of the men was worried, asking if Shutraf's body could withstand all that energy, to which he replied that, of course, it couldn't. That's why he was uniting this energy. That's why he was uniting this energy with divine energy and protecting his body with the grace of the goddess. Shutraf hoped that formidable adventurers would be sent this time, so that he could benefit even more from this energy. Then the scene shifted to the adventurers, who finally arrived in the city of Trist, a destroyed, ruined, completely abandoned city. Everyone was shocked to see the state of the place. Alias explained that, with the magnitude of the crime, it was normal for this to happen, and warned everyone to hold on to their belongings. But the warning came too late, as a knife was thrown, forcing the group to dodge. Taking advantage of the distraction, some children stole the coins from the wizard, who was furious and wanted to cast spells on them. However, Alias remembered that, in this place, everyone was on their own. The wizard asked how they could trust an inn there, and Alias replied that he knew a place. When they arrived, everyone was even more surprised, and Sildella asked if Alias really wanted them to stay there, wondering if it was the Plef family's place. Alias confirmed it, and Sildella thought that Alias must be mad to want to stay in the home of the family he himself had defeated. As they entered, they heard a woman speaking. She said that she had no intention of apologizing, either for herself or for her family, because all those who had dipped their hands into forbidden magic should be punished, including her own father. That woman was Sildella, the current head of House Plef. She also said that the Ranpelt had broken the law, and that they couldn't just let them get away with it. Alias agreed, saying that they couldn't just stand by and watch the destruction caused by the Ranpelt. He was determined to act, and the group prepared for what was to come. Karnak thinks that Alias is good, as he has managed to redirect all the hatred towards the parish of Trist. He goes on to say that he agrees very much on this subject and would very much appreciate Sildella's help in the operation against the Ramps. Sildella replies that of course she will help and will do her best. She asks what the plan is, since the Ramps have recently reinforced their security, and it's now impossible to get to the mansion unless you're someone of high rank. Alias explains that this is exactly why he thought of focusing on Ranfeld's residence. Everyone is surprised, and the wizard actually wonders if he's serious, since this doesn't seem like a very predictable plan. But Alias assures him that it will work. Sildella adds that the estate doesn't have much military strength, so it's possible, but admits that they don't have much information about the necromancers and their abilities. Alias reassures the group that the elite troops gathered there are very experienced in fighting necromancers. The next scene takes place at night in Ranfeld's residence. We see guards prowling near the walls, but on the other side there's a team preparing something. They are preparing Molotov cocktails to throw. The team is made up of people from the Splashes group, and they say they're there for revenge. They start bombarding the property with Molotovs. A fire breaks out and the guards go on alert, some frightened, others fighting back with magic. Meanwhile, the team of protagonists take advantage of the distraction to break into the residence. Karnak comments that the distraction was very useful, and Alias agrees, saying that they will take this opportunity to enter. He can already smell the stench of necromancy coming from the mansion. Suddenly, they are spotted by the Ramph's guards. The wizard picks up his staff and excitedly fires a fireball, knocking out half the guards. He also conjures streams of light to trap the guards, who are baffled by the speed with which the wizard casts his spells. Finally, Sildella activates her battle aura and casts a red aura slash, which tears the guards apart. She uses her speed to wipe out everyone in front of her. Barrows observes that, although powerful, her technique is wrong. As the group watches the battle, 2 guards try to attack, but are detected. Barrows says he's going to warm up and takes them down with ease. Karnak, for his part, also warms up, knocking down several guards with his magic arrows. Alias, despite being a priest, does very well in hand-to-hand combat, surprising Barrows, who wonders where Alias learned to handle his sword like that. Alias notices that the guards are retreating, recognizing who is in control. Sildella, puzzled, wonders why the necromancers haven't arrived yet, even with all the invasion, light and noise. Alias guesses that they are waiting inside the building, where they would have an advantage. When they enter the house, everything is quiet and dark, until a mysterious voice greets them, telling them that they have managed to get there. An aura user and a high-level magician. The voice adds that, however, none of this makes sense in the face of the power of darkness. Then 2 necromancer cultists and a high-class undead specter, a hooded figure with a scythe, appear. Everyone is excited by the imminent confrontation. Alias finally says, "Now we have evidence and we can put an end to their race." Telepathically, Karnak tells Barrows that this is going to bring in a lot of money. Barrows replies, "Really?" The necromancers, annoyed, ask him how he can dare to laugh in their presence and start attacking. One of the necromancers orders the elite specter to suck out all their life essence. However, Alias begins to use his divine energy spell, weakening the specter. The necromancer is amazed to realize that there is a priest there. With ease, Sildella manages to pierce the high-level specter and quickly sets out to attack the 3 necromancers who summoned it. Suddenly, the heads of 2 of the necromancers explode next to her. Alias, surprised, complains that they should be captured, not killed. Sildella, shocked, says that she didn't do it. Suddenly, they see a magical flesh with veins taking over the mansion. The doors are blocked and everything turns red. Alias despairs as the space around them changes. One of the necromancers says that this is going to be a very good harvest. An aura user, a 6th circle mage, and even Alias Inquisitor. Alias recognizes the voice and, upon confirming that it was indeed Bishop Shutraf, he is incredulous. Shutraf replies that he was there because he had always suspected Alias, hadn't he? Alias regrets this, saying that he didn't want to believe that a servant of the goddess would have succumbed to the power of darkness. Meanwhile, Sildella and the wizard try to find a way out, but they can't. Everything is blocked. Alias explains that his powers are being suppressed within this darkness. He tries to use his magic to eliminate the death magic, but is unsuccessful. He realizes that his divine magic is having no effect. Karnak realizes that Alias' divine power has only fed the power of the necromancy present there. Shutraf laughs and says, "Did they really think that the necromancers they've met so far were real? If it was just necromancy, why would the 7 orders be so careful with the power of darkness?" Shutraf teases Alias, asking what it's like to meet a real necromancer for the first time. Telepathically, Karnak warns Barrows to get ready, because if they're unlucky, that could be their tomb. He explains that the barrier has both divine and necromantic power, something he's never seen before, and that there's not much he can do about it. Karnak decides to use his chaos mana. Barrows wonders how a redneck priest knows a spell that Karnak doesn't know. At that moment, golems made of necromancy start coming out of the walls. Alias obviously uses his priestly power to defend himself, but the golems are powerful enough to start cracking the barrier. The wizard asks Alias to hold on just a little longer, as he is conjuring his flaming spell. When he is finally ready to use it, the enemies break through the barrier, throwing everyone to the ground. The group is easily captured, as they are knocked unconscious by the impact. The necromancers order them to be locked up with the other sacrifices. Sildella tries to fight the golems, but her sword has no effect and she is quickly captured. One of the necromancers orders the other 2 not to be taken, as they are useless, but to take the girl as well. While Sildella was being pressured by the golems, Barrows arrived and easily ripped the arm off one of them, piercing its chest and hitting the core, fragmenting the golem until it turned to stone dust. Sildella wonders how Barrows managed to do all that without using an aura. Then it's explained that the weak points of chaotic golems are in the places where mana doesn't flow, but the problem is that the flow of mana changes constantly, making it difficult to identify the weak points. However, Barrows, with his vast experience, knows exactly where to hit. Barrows begins to defend himself and thinks that Sildella will have to deal with the golems alone for the time being, as he also needs to protect himself. He thinks he needs to buy time for Karnak to do something, but Karnak is failing miserably at controlling the necromancy. He admits that, even sucking in all that energy, he can't control it. Meanwhile, Karnak defeats some approaching golems and realizes that there is something else involved in the situation, something he needs to test. The golems, however, are being easily defeated by Barrows and Karnak, which irritates Shutraf, who wonders how those two, whom he considered useless, are eliminating his golems so easily. Shutraf decides to send something stronger, a spirit of necromantic magic. Karnak invokes a shield and calls Sildella to run to him, but realizes that she is a little slower than he expected. When she tries to attack the spirit, she ends up being wounded. Both her arms are completely burnt. The spirit captures Sildella and advances towards Karnak. Karnak taunts the spirit, calling it a second-rate little necromancer. He then confirms that his theory was correct. Alias, desperate, realizes that the barrier is collapsing and asks Karnak what he has done. Karnak calmly replies that he hasn't done anything much. He's just overlapped his own barrier with Shutraf's. With his superior power, he overpowers Shutraf. Who, enraged, summons a horde of zombies to attack the protagonists. Barrows realizes that these zombies seem to be elite, and as he and Karnak fight them, it becomes clear that if they continue at this pace, they will end up fighting forever. To ward off the zombies, Barrows uses his black blade, cutting several zombies in half. Shutraf comments that Karnak hasn't done a bad job, but then summons a great demon called Gwenna, who asks what his contractor wants. Shutraf replies that the aim is to kill them both and bring back their bodies. However, Gwenna is confused about who exactly to kill, and Shutraf wonders if Karnak has used illusion magic. Karnak confirms, revealing that he created the illusion since Shutraf's barrier was broken. Karnak then disappears from the battlefield, leaving Shutraf furious. Meanwhile, the protagonists are out of town, resting. Karnak thinks that Shutraf is an idiot for specializing in only one type of magic, and that this has saved them. Barrows asks if it's too risky to go back to the pleths, and Karnak agrees, saying that the Flad will certainly pass through. Sildella, still badly injured, is conscious and comments that they were deceiving the others all along. Karnak and Barrows are a little nervous when they realize that she has woken up. Barrows asks Sildella how she is, and she, realizing that they are necromancers, asks where they are. Karnak explains that they are outside the city, away from the barrier, so as not to be detected, and that the priority now is to heal her. Karnak, however, mentions that he will need to erase some of her memories, but promises that it won't be a big deal. Sildella replies that it's fine, as she can no longer feel her arms and won't be able to live a normal life. Knowing that she will no longer be able to fight like a warrior, she asks them to kill her right there. Barrows, surprised, asks Karnak why he doesn't use a priest spell to heal her. Karnak explains that he can't use divine magic, as that would be against the natural order of things. Barrows suggests that he use necromancy then, and Sildella wonders if Karnak would really be able to recover his arms using necromancy. Karnak confirms that he can, but doesn't recommend it, because in order to accept necromancy in her body, she would have to become his servant. He asks her if she would really like to be the servant of an evil necromancer. Thinking about it, Sildella is shocked. It is explained that a necromancer can control the human soul, turning it into a slave through a contract of servitude. Many captured adventurers have endured cruel torture until they meet their deaths. Sildella thinks this is terrible, but as she looks at her burnt arms, she hesitates. Telepathically, Karnak says to Barrows, "You mentioned that on purpose, didn't you, you asshole?" And Barrows replies that he did it on purpose, knowing full well what Sildella is feeling. Karnak goes to Sildella and says that although he avoids using necromancy, seeing her in that state, he can't suggest what she should do. He says that if she becomes his servant, she will certainly get her arms back. Sildella wonders what Karnak would do to her if she accepted. Karnak explains that after the contract is sealed, he will see the structure of her soul and will be able to restore her body. However, some restrictions will be imposed, such as the impossibility of betraying her master, because if she does, her body will die instantly. Sildella ponders that, although it's dangerous, it's not so different from a vow of loyalty that knights make. Karnak, however, warns her that by doing so, she will lose her freedom as a swordsman, and the decision is hers. Without much thought, Sildella asks Lord Karnak to accept her as his servant. He asks her if she is sure, and she says yes, that this is better than never holding a sword again. Karnak then begins the oath and contract of servitude. When Sildella accepts, Karnak uses necromancy to open her mind, promising that, with the contract, she will regain what she has lost. Gradually, her arms return to normal, and by the end of the process, Sildella is completely healed. Karnak declares that from now on, Sildella is his servant. She, happy to have his arms back, replies that, of course, he is her master now. Barrows comments that it was a good deal she made, and asks Karnak what they will do with the kidnapped. Karnak recognizes that Shutraf's power is greater than he thought, and says that it would be better to unlock all the necromancy he possesses instead of using the mana of chaos. Barrows warns that if Karnak does this, he will destroy the entire city. Karnak replies that they have two options: destroy everything and save them both, or run away. Barrows concludes that, either way, they will come out as the villains of the story. As they argue, Sildella intervenes, asking, "Isn't saving them a priority?" Barrows is surprised at the idea of saving everyone using such a violent method, but Sildella insists that, above all, they must save their friends. Barrows comments, "Ah, I see, so if we do good, we can justify evil acts." Karnak agrees, saying that he will unleash his necromancy. Barrows replies sarcastically, "Fine, as long as you don't kill everyone." Desperate, Sildella protests, "That's not what I meant." Meanwhile, in the city, we see people being interrogated by soldiers who ask if they have seen any suspicious outsiders, probably looking for Karnak. The soldiers intimidate the citizens, threatening them to talk soon. In another scene, we see a guard drinking while another approaches him, asking why he isn't working. The guard replies, "Are you giving me orders, you asshole?" The other insists that he doesn't want to be there either, but he has to do the job. While he's talking, his sword seems to be taken over by magic, and he accidentally attacks the other guard. Clearly, that was magic. One of the guards, confused, says, No, it wasn't me. My sword moved by itself." But the magic takes over the other guard's sword again, and they start fighting each other. The guards try to get them to stop, but one of the guards is already turning into a creature. All the other guards attack him, calling him a monster. The transformed guard wonders what monster they're talking about, while the fight intensifies, with blood flying everywhere. It is revealed that it was Karnak who was causing this, with his magic of corruption. Sildella, seeing the confusion, asks why he needs to cause such a big scene. Karnak casually replies that he is assembling an army of the undead. He says he has no choice, but admits he's having fun with it. Barrows comments sarcastically, "Just a little evil to save your friends, eh?" Sildella, on reflection, realizes that perhaps they are saving their friends just to justify the evil deeds they want to do. Sildella observes all the fighting below and thinks that Karnak isn't as bad as she thought, since he's just making the Flad fight each other, leaving the ordinary citizens alone. As the guards kill each other, new undead are formed for Karnak's army. After a while, Karnak comments, "I think that's enough," and uses his necromancer spell to raise the undead army. As the corpses rise, Sildella says, "Forget what I said. He's evil, all right." Now, Karnak has a huge army of undead, and Sildella wonders, "Am I going to be okay being a servant to a guy like that?" As they approach the Flad mansion, they find more necromancer soldiers waiting. Karnak comments that everything is going according to plan, but recognizes that Shutraf is much more powerful than he thought. He wonders when Shutraf managed to summon this kind of creature, as Karnak believed he was the only one capable of performing these spells. He also reflects that the past really has changed. Karnak then says that they need to rescue the prisoners quickly, before it's too late. He reveals that the zombies are an illusion, leaving Sildella shocked. Karnak explains that not all of them, but most, because she never imagined that he could create so many zombies so quickly. Sildella, relieved, begins to think that Karnak isn't so bad and rushes to help with the rescue. Meanwhile, Shutraf is performing a demonic ritual with two prisoners tied up. He mocks the zombies, saying that they are nothing compared to his invocations. While Shutraf is connected to the minds of the creatures he summoned, looking for Karnak, the latter appears behind him and sarcastically comments on the size of the mansion's basement. Shutraf, surprised, asks, "That voice?" Turning around, he sees Karnak and his allies standing there. Karnak then says, "I told you I'd be here soon, Shutraf." Shutraf, incredulous, wonders how they got there. Karnak, noticing Shutraf's tiredness, teases him, you look tired. Fighting the zombies has left you a bit drained. Huh. Meanwhile, Sildella is worried about the two prisoners tied to the altar. She wonders why the sacrifice hasn't been made yet, even after so long. Shutraf, for his part, begins to think that all this is Karnak's fault, but he's wrong about a few things. Although Shutraf is exhausted, he declares that he can still take them on and promises that Karnak will regret having entered that basement. He summons another horde of zombies to attack the protagonists. While Karnak stands still, Sildella and Barrows advance. Although Barrows doesn't exactly have an aura, he advances with force. Karnak, without wasting any time, makes a powerful invocation from the depths of purgatory, bringing the echoes of the underworld, specters that surround the zombies. With the help of the warriors and the specters, the zombies are quickly defeated. Shutraf is once again stunned by the speed with which his enemies have defeated his horde. He decides to use his trump card again, summoning the great demon Gwenna. Sildella is amazed to see him, but Barrows comments with disdain, "Ah, that guy again." Karnak, also bored, says, "Don't you think you're repeating yourself a bit, Shutraf?" Karnak thinks that Shutraf's power will also reach its limit at some point. As Jurna is leaving the demonic summoning circle, he seems to get stuck. Karnak teasingly comments, "Gwenna's legs are weak. Come on, walk a bit more." The demon, annoyed, puts all his strength into getting out of the circle, causing a huge explosion. Finally, he stands up and Shutraf orders him to kill them both and bring the woman for sacrifice. Jurna imposes enormous pressure with his powerful aura, claiming that his contractor's wish will be fulfilled. Sildella is impressed by the demon's power, while Karnak, dissatisfied with the way things are going, tells the group, "Let's fight for now. I'll think of another plan." Reluctantly, they follow Karnak's orders, as they are his servants. However, not even the two of them together manage to scratch Jurna's skin. The demon laughs and mocks them. "Those little insects trying to attack me are very funny." He begins to crush them both with ease. Karnak, conjuring a spell, throws 3 fireballs in Jurna's direction, but the demon just reaches out and absorbs the magic. Sildella, shocked, comments that Jurna is incredibly powerful, comparing him to a purple-level knight. Barrows, frustrated, says that if he had awakened his battle aura, he wouldn't be fighting so badly. Desperate, Karnak shouts that it's time for Plan P. Barrows, alarmed, replies, "Oh no, not Plan P." Suddenly, Barrows kneels down, and Karnak begins to channel magic into his head, reciting an incantation to open Barrows' mind and make him accept his orders. But not just him, Sildella too. Plan P, it is revealed, is possession. Barrows, laughing, comments, "It's been a long time since I've possessed anyone's body." Sildella, realizing that Barrows is going to possess her body, is stunned. "But I'm the servant." Karnak then merges their names and says, "Go, Sarah Barrows." Barrows apologizes, "I'm sorry, Sildella, but I'm going to use your body for a little while." Desperate, Sildella cries, "Please treat my body right. I'll need it later." Jurna, confused, wonders how someone without a battle aura could use someone else's aura, but Barrows is already on the demon's trail and replies, "Who says I can't use it?" With a sharp blow, Barrows rips open the demon's chest. He explains that using someone else's aura is his specialty. Jurna, surprised, realizes that Barrows has hit exactly his weak spot and that he is much stronger than before. Suddenly, a blue aura begins to emanate from Sildella's sword, and she wonders if her body has become a blue knight only because Barrows has possessed it. Barrows praises Sildella's power and thanks her, saying that the fight will be much easier with this power. He begins to deliver a series of rapid blows to the demon, who can barely react. Barrows cuts Jurna's arm and continues attacking, climbing up and down on him to confuse him. "Is that all you've got?" Barrows teases. Jurna, incredulous, calls Barrows a monster, but refuses to believe that Barrows will win just by possessing someone else's body. The demon launches an evil blast at Barrows, but Karnak steps in to block it. A huge explosion occurs, and Jurna is elated, thinking that they have all exploded together. However, Karnak replies, "The summoner and the summoned are the same, dumb and easy to fool." Several of Karnak's illusions appear around Jurna, and Karnak teases, "You didn't think it would be so easy, did you?" Jurna, confused, doesn't know who to attack. Just then, Barrows appears behind the demon and, without difficulty, delivers multiple slashes, tearing Jurna's flesh and draining his mana. Jurna, weakened, thinks, "Unbelievable, a human could do all this to me." The summoning circle appears again at the demon's feet, and Barrows comments that the summoning is finally over. Before being banished, Jurna curses the group, saying, "Just wait, next time, I'll finish you off." Karnak, seeing the demon Jurna trying to escape, teases, "Oh, you're trying to escape? Do you really think I'm going to let you?" you? I'll end your race right here. He uses his necromantic power to trap the demon before it can enter the summoning circle. The demon realizes that Karnak's magic is causing its mana to flow backwards, and it begins to combust. Jirna explodes in a burst of light, turning to dust. When the possession is over, Sildella feels a lot of pain, and Barrows, in his playful way, comments, "Thank you, Miss Sarah, for letting me use your body. I'm with you." Karnak then turns to Shutraf and says, "All right, now all that's left is this asshole." Seeing what has happened to the demon, Shutraf decides to surrender. He offers to tell him everything he knows and asks what Karnak wants to know. Confused, Karnak replies, "I don't think you understand. It's much easier to kill you and interrogate your soul afterwards. Why complicate it?" He asks Sildella if she has a problem with this, and she says no. Karnak, satisfied, conjures a giant scythe with his necromancy and eliminates Shutraf right there. With Shutraf's body ready, Karnak comments, "Okay, time to do business." He starts sucking up the souls that Shutraf had absorbed and comments, "Wow, how generous. There are more than 30 souls here. We can even go home with that, Barrows?" Karnak then suggests that they've gathered enough and should head back. Barrows, excited, replies, "Sure, we'll eat at the little restaurant on the way back." But Sildella, indignant, calls their attention. "For God's sake, are you going to leave those two here?" Karnak replies, "Oh yes, there they are." After a while, the two prisoners wake up, completely shocked to discover that Shutraf has been defeated. Karnak, of course, makes up a story, saying that they were lucky because an army of zombies came out of nowhere, and Shutraf was forced to retreat to the basement. He also adds that Sildella was instrumental in defeating the necromancer, otherwise they wouldn't have succeeded. Alias comments that it must have been a blessing from Atoba that helped them. Karnak then suggests that they perform the purification ritual with divine magic, and, as they perform the ritual, he comments, "The amount of darkness is incredible, 10 times more than the other necromancers we've seen." Barrows mentally asks why Karnak hasn't taken it all, and Karnak replies that it would be too suspicious. Alias declares that they have finished the job and that the situation will soon stabilize, leaving the rest in the hands of the church. As the sun rises, Alias is shocked to hear Sildella declare that she will become a knight of Zestrod's territory. Karnak becomes angry, feeling that they are underestimating his territory. Sildella, realizing the situation, makes up an excuse, saying that she swore loyalty to Karnak because he deserved it. Alias, however, congratulates Sildella on having found someone to serve. Karnak then announces that it is time for them to return and, with a nod, thanks them for their cooperation, promising that they will see each other again in the future. In the next scene, already in Zestrod's territory, Tafel is happy to see the return of Karnak and his companions. He also celebrates everyone's reunion. When Sildella gets off her horse, the servants start whispering, wondering who the beautiful woman is that Karnak has brought. Everyone assumes that she is his mistress, but Karnak quickly introduces Sildella as the newest knight in Zestrod's territory. The butler gets nervous and comments that, even though it's on the edge, Zestrod's territory can't just accept anyone as a knight. But Barrows says to Sildella, "Show them!" Sildella then unleashes her battle aura and performs a massive attack, cutting a tree in half. Everyone is impressed to see that she is an aura user. She, in turn, says that she expects everyone to work well. In the next scene, a few weeks later, Sildella is training with the Knights of the Order of Zestrad. The guards comment that the poor knight who is facing Sildella is suffering. They notice that it's not just a question of strength, but also of technique, and recognize that she is extremely powerful. Before long, she disarms her opponent with ease, and he admits, it's as expected of Sildella. She dismisses the staff, saying they've all done a good job, but suddenly Barrows appears and asks if he can be next. The fight begins with Barrows criticizing Sildella, saying that her use of the battle aura is still strange. He comments that she is wasting power on every attack and that she needs to measure the power of her blows. As she catches herself during training, she thinks that it's not easy at all. She asks for a break and asks Barrows if he couldn't possess her body again to train her in the use of the aura, but Barrows refuses, explaining that if her soul is possessed 3 times, she will end up going mad. Sildella is shocked to discover that he has already possessed her without asking. However, Barrows reassures her, saying that she has enough power and talent to become strong without having to resort to this technique. Barrows also admits that he needs help to unlock his own battle aura. In the next scene, we see Karnak in his office, reflecting. He wonders how Shutraf managed to combine divine energy with necromancy and, frustrated, admits that he has no idea how it was possible. Determined to leave this mystery for later, he begins to reflect on the darkness of the apocalypse, which flows through time and space. He plans plans to use this darkness to create a powerful body capable of investigating these distortions. With his vast experience, Karnak purifies and joins the threads of darkness, stating that the body is ready. He calls this power the Eye of Darkness. In the next scene, the group is camping around a campfire. Karnak asks Barrows if it's true that he still hasn't managed to awaken his battle aura and comments, "Weren't you the greatest martial artist in the world?" Barrows jokingly replies, "That was before we went back in time. When you were the king of death, everything was much easier." Sildella, overhearing the conversation, becomes confused and begins to realize the true nature of the two. She wonders if Karnak and Barrows are the cause of all the misfortune that is happening in the world. At the same time, she looks incredulously at the two, who, despite being world rulers in the future, are just eating roasted corn like ordinary people. Sildella then asks why they need to raise the Eye of Darkness in Dentair's territory, and Karnak explains that it would be a huge problem if they were caught using necromantic magic in Zestrad. He, in an Oscar-worthy performance, pretends to be furious at what Dentair has done to his family, but Sildella senses that he is lying. In fact, Randolph's spirit whispers in Karnak's ear that he will pay for his lies one day. Later, under the light of the full moon, Karnak announces that the time has come and finally unleashes the Eye of Darkness. He declares that he will send the Eye through space-time to try to close the doors that the darkness of the apocalypse has opened. Using his magic, he throws the Eye of Darkness into the sky, cutting through the clouds. As they watch the scene, the others begin to wonder if everything isn't too quiet. Karnak explains that it's because they haven't opened a rift in space-time, they're just observing what's inside it. He focuses on the Eye of Darkness to see what it's showing, and inside, on the infinite horizon, Karnak says that it seems to be working. The eye begins to look sideways, and, at the bottom of the infinite horizon, Karnak spots a tree. He comments that he seems to have found the source of everything, the tree of emptiness, Astra SHF. Karnak recognizes that this tree was something he used in his past life. He says it wasn't pretty then, and now, looking at it up close, it's even uglier. He notices a fruit falling from the tree and comments that this is how the darkness of the apocalypse is proliferating. Now that he knows he has to stop the tree, Karnak approaches the core, which was not difficult to find. But just as he's about to investigate further, a voice appears, echoing in Karnak's soul, telling him to stay away. The voice declares that the place is abandoned and destined to disappear. Karnak asks whose voice it is, and the answer comes, "I am death, death and the purest darkness, destined to destroy everything." Suddenly, a massive and powerful aura begins to emanate, and Karnak feels that he is facing the purest power of the darkness of the apocalypse. The voice says that it is doing this in the name of Tezranik. The tree declares that, in the name of Tezran, Karnak, as a mere mortal, must return to his world. At that moment, the Eye of Darkness is obliterated and Karnak faints. His companions wake him up and, with a severe headache, he asks what happened. Barrows explains that Karnak's body began to float and suddenly he fainted. Karnak, still dazed, asks what was the name of that god they mentioned. Sildella replied that the god they worshipped was Tezran, the black god of death and darkness. Karnak recognizes the name and, still incredulous, wonders if this being really exists. In the next scene, we see a scene that looks like infinity. 3 figures are summoned by a divine light. The first is the Pope of Death, who comments on a problem in Sanctuary. The second, the Dark Lord, wonders how something could approach the Sanctuary. The third figure, the Priestess of the Black Goddess, finds everything very strange and rings a bell, summoning a servant. She orders the servant to fetch Rudel for her, as she is looking for him. This woman is Elzer of Rapon, an imperial mage, one of the 3 archpriestesses of destruction. In the next scene, Karnak is talking to his group. He admits that he hasn't found a way to close the opening and that if they keep trying, they'll probably be discovered. He explains that the only thing he's discovered so far is that the Order of the Black God believes in this Tezranik guy. The big question is whether they are using the power of the Void Tree or disturbing it in order to obtain that power. If it's the second option, Karnak warns that this is a big problem. Sildella asks what the difference is between the 2 possibilities, and Karnak explains that if they are disturbing the tree, it means that they have the ability to influence the power beyond spacetime. This implies that they have also transcended spacetime, something that was difficult even for him in his past life. Barrows and Sildella are shocked, wondering if these people have the absolute power of death, just like Tezranik. Karnak concludes that if they really possess such power, there would be no need to do these unnecessary things. Perhaps this power is what keeps Tezranik trapped in the void. Sildella speculates whether Tezranik could be one of the fragments of Karnak himself that has become this god of death. Karnak doesn't pay much attention to the idea at first, but then admits that it might not be a completely unfounded theory. Barrows then asks if Karnak is saying that the tree called Tezran is acting as if it were a god. Does this mean that he is now able to create gods? Karnak comments that it's not just a probability, but the problem is that they don't know anything yet. The others are a little disappointed by this. Karnak then says that he needs to investigate more about the Order of the Black God, but Barrows points out that, with the methods and connections they have, it will be very difficult to get that kind of information. Barrows suggests that perhaps they need to enter the Order of the King. It is explained that the Order of the King is a special imperial organization created to hunt down members of the Order of the Black God after the Age of Chaos, under the orders of the Seven Goddesses, with Inquisitors and Dark Hunters. Although that era is over, the emergence of the Order of the Dark God across the continent has started to cause problems, especially as many high-ranking members of this cult are noble royalty. The Order of the Seven Goddesses alone had a hard time dealing with this, which is why the Seven Nations banded together to develop a special division, the Order of the King. Members of the Order of the King have the right of censorship, allowing them to investigate and arrest suspected cultists. However, the conditions for joining the Order of the King are quite strict. Karnak, without much hope of joining the Order of the King, hears Barrow's comment that, in his past life, he was a dark hunter for a long time and perhaps he could get back into it. Sildella then asks if being part of the Order of the King is really their plan, and if it is, she can give them a chance to apply. Everyone is happy, surprised that Sildella has this kind of connection, and immediately starts packing. The next morning, Karnak's butler was distraught to find a letter left by his master, which read, "I need to go out for a while, don't worry. I'll bring fame and honor to the family." The butler, in a panic, exclaims, "Young master, you left without telling me again." In the city of Endrunta, the three of them are sitting at a small table drinking coffee. Barrows asks if it's all right for them to leave the territory, and Karnak replies that it's all right as long as it's for a short time because, as Lord of the Lands of Zestrad, he can't go away for long. A person approaches, apologizing for being late for the meeting, but Barrows and Karnak welcome him cheerfully. "Ah, we've just arrived. Welcome." Karnak thanks Alias for showing up and helping them. The night before, while they were on the run, Karnak had asked Sildella if the recommendation she mentioned was made by Alias. Karnak also asks if the Order of the King and the Order of the Seven Goddesses are separate. Sildella explains that they are not completely independent, since the Order of the King depends on the clerics of the Order of the Seven Goddesses to capture necromancers. In addition, in order to accept new members, they must receive a recommendation or be evaluated by a priest or cleric. A first-class inquisitor, such as Alias, has the authority to give a recommendation. Sildella reveals that she learned about this directly from Alias when he called her on the mission against the Ranfelds. Alias, a little embarrassed, comments that he wanted to give the three of them a recommendation, but they ran back to Zestrad, and he's glad they came back to talk to him. He then hands over the letter of recommendation and warns them that, although it is not a guarantee that they will enter the Order of the King, he wishes them good luck and blesses them with the power of Atoba. In the next scene, in the capital of Ethea's kingdom, the three arrive at the main headquarters of the Order of the King. The place resembles a guild with several talented people. Karnak comments that the place seems to be much more impressive than he expected, and Sildella mentions that, just on the way, she saw two aura users. They are met by a person who confirms their letter of recommendation and offers to guide them to the Lord of the Order. A man introduces himself as the commander of the Order of the King Iranil. The commander of the Order of the King Iranil is a purple-level knight. After the introductions, he confirms that the letter of recommendation has been verified and that everyone's identities are safe. Furthermore, the recommendation came from Alias, a trusted figure. However, the commander explains that this is not enough to enter the Order of the King. Karnak comments that he has heard that there is a training period to prevent pagans from joining the Order. Iranil then says that he's about to hand over the first task to them, which surprises the group since they've only just arrived. The commander, laughing, explains that this is how things work in the Order of the King, without wasting time. He then introduces them to General Tarman of the 4th Battalion, who will be responsible for guiding them. As well as Tarman, the group is introduced introduced to the other two members of the battalion, Sid and Alice. Karnak introduces himself and asks if everyone is really that busy in the Order of the King. Tarman replies that not really, but that things are hectic today because they've been given a new mission. Barrows is impressed to discover that the general is a wizard, and Tarman replies jokingly, "Can't a mere fifth circle wizard be a general?" Barrows, a little flustered, clarifies that he meant no disrespect to Tarman, but Tarman explains that in their work, identity and magical abilities are just as important as physical strength. He says that the more time they spend there, the more they will learn about the real work of the Order of the King. Intelligence gathering, tracking down pagans, kidnapping key figures, and interrogation, not just fighting. Sildella, upon hearing this, comments that it seems that everything there is an evil work. Tarman confirms, "That's exactly it. Our job is to make mischief with the pagans." He adds that mages are successful in this area because they can use magic in various ways, and most of the generals of the Order of the King are mages. Sildella asks if clerics shouldn't also be qualified for this kind of work, but Alice explains that the Order of the King was created to keep the Order of the Seven Goddesses in check. That's why they can't send priests there. Tarman begins to explain the mission. They have received information that a regional nobleman, Count Brant, in the south of the Kingdom of Ostel, may have joined the Order of the Black God. Their mission is to disguise themselves as adventurers and gather enough evidence to arrest the Count. Tarman admits that this is all the information they have, leaving Karnak shocked, as they don't even know if the Count is really a pagan. Now the group understands the pressure and the heavy work ahead of them, finding out information on their own. Meanwhile, in Count Brant's castle, we see the Count at the bedside of his son, who is very ill. A hooded man comments that the boy's illness is spreading more and more, and that the Count needs to open his eyes. The Count stubbornly replies that he knows the fate of those who use necromancy. The hooded man argues that moving a corpse is not exactly necromancy, but a service to the god of death and darkness, Tezranik. He claims that if the Count doesn't do it, death will be his son's fate. The necromancer then asks the Count, "Is healing someone an evil act?" The Count hesitates, but admits that accepting the death of his son at such a young age seems much more evil. He reflects on how the Order of the Goddesses did nothing to help him, and that perhaps Tezranik's power could give his son a new lease of life. After a pause, the Count gives in and agrees to convert his faith to Tezranik. In the next scene, we see the group at the inn on the outskirts of Brant's territory. Tarman reminds everyone that they need to start gathering information, which seems obvious, but points out that they need to pretend they're not members of the Order of the King. Tarman hands the group a pamphlet, explaining that they need to use a method that doesn't appear to be related to the pagans. He points to the flyer and says that the wanted man is Helen Krat, a notorious criminal in the capital. Helen is talented with disguises and has not yet been caught. Barrows asks if Helen is related to today's mission, but Tarman explains that not at all. They're just going to use him as an excuse to pass themselves off as bounty hunters, collecting information undercover without arousing suspicion. They split into 3 teams, pretending to be bounty hunters, and start interrogating people around the city about Helen Krat. However, the information gathering doesn't result in anything concrete. The next scene takes place at Count Brant's residence. Tarman apologizes for appearing so suddenly, but explains that they are adventurers from the guild and bounty hunters in search of Helen Krat, the wanted man. He asks if the Count could help them. The Count, showing a willingness to collaborate, says that he will help, since a dangerous criminal in his territory is not good for him either. Tarman thanks him and says they won't cause any trouble before they leave. Back at the inn, Barrows asks why they found the Count just to ask him such a simple question. Tarman replies that, although it seems simple, it was enough, as he has already realized everything that is going on in that house. Later in the evening, at the inn, they gather the information they have collected. Karnak and Sid share that the Count has lost his entire family, and the only survivor is his son, who is seriously ill. Not even the sacred cure has been able to help. Tarman observes that this is a perfect case for the cultists to take advantage of. Another suspicious point is that the crime rate in the area has dropped dramatically, and Alice adds that criminals have disappeared en masse. Tarman and Barrows, during their visit to the Count, noticed that all the windows in the house were covered with thick curtains to block out the sunlight. This raises suspicions of involvement with vampires. In the next scene, we see Count Brant having dinner with someone who seems to be drinking a red liquid. The Count asks his son if he hates him, to which the son replies that he doesn't, because his life is much more peaceful now. He just drinks blood, a change in his diet, and that's better than dying. The count reflects that his son's personality hasn't changed, and that the order of the Black God hasn't let him down. He believes that when Tezranic sets foot in those lands and establishes the refuge between life and death, his son will be able to live a normal life again. The count promises his son that he won't live in that body forever. In the next scene, we see Sildella and Alice walking together. Sildella wonders why they need to investigate further, since it seems obvious that the count is involved with cultists. Alice replies that they need absolute proof. Suddenly, a man approaches them, asking if they are the bounty hunters. He informs them that they have found the wanted man, and it was the count who asked them to warn them. Sildella and Alice become suspicious, as they know that the wanted man is a fake. Later, when everyone gathers to discuss the information, Tarman comments that this is clearly a trap. The count is suspicious of them and wants to lure them out at night. This further confirms the count's involvement with vampires. Karnak, worried, says that the situation is problematic because if they ignore the message, the cultists will become even more suspicious of them. The group agrees, and Karnak thinks, "My God, these people are stupid." Sid asks the captain what they're going to do now, since it's obvious that they're at a disadvantage in the trap. Tarman, left with no choice, replies that they will play their game. In the next scene, the group is gathered in an abandoned and destroyed hut, waiting for the trap to be sprung. Sildella, curious, asks how strong the vampires are. Tarman replies that they are only a little stronger than they were in their human forms, nothing to worry about. She then asks about the elder vampires, and Sid explains that these are often discovered quickly, but are considerably more powerful. Normally, it's impossible for vampires to survive for so long, and Sildella asks if, on becoming a vampire, an aura user can still use this power. Tarman explains that no, vampires lose the ability to use aura and magic. He tries to reassure the group, "Are you worried? I know it's a bit arrogant, but we're very powerful." Suddenly, a light appears in the window, a fireball that hits the hut and causes an explosion. Alice, however, uses her shield to protect everyone. A whole group of knights appears, ready to attack, led by a vampire who comments that normal people wouldn't be able to dodge such an attack. Tarman notices that the vampire is using aura, which surprises him, as he didn't know vampires could do that. Sid recognizes the leader as Sir Durrell, Count Brant's strongest knight, now transformed into a vampire and still with his aura. Tarman, confused, isn't sure what's going on, but says it's not the time to question. He declares that they are now enemies of the king and the goddess, and will suffer judgment. The vampires laugh, mocking the kind of judgment they could impose. Tarman replies that if not for good, then for evil, and they all prepare for battle. The fight intensifies, with the group taking on the vampires in a frantic battle. Sid kills some vampires with ease, while Alice burns them with divine power. The vampires quickly identify Alice, the priestess, as a threat, but when a vampire advances to attack her, Tarman protects her and throws a bolt of lightning at the enemy's head. As he watches the battle, Tarman is impressed to see that Karnak and Barrows are much more powerful than he imagined, commenting to himself that although they are strong, he doesn't know if that will bring victory that night. The battle now depends on the aura users. Sildella is involved in an intense duel against Durrell. He praises her abilities for someone so young, but claims that she isn't strong enough to beat him. Sildella, tired, tries to keep up the pace, but Durrell, with his experience and aura, seems to have the upper hand. Meanwhile, the all-out fight continues, and the vampires, serving Tezranic, show no signs of giving up. Karnak comments that vampires are regenerating very quickly, especially since, as well as being vampires, they are also aura users. Barrows agrees, mentioning that Durrell will be a problem and asking if Sildella is alright. However, Sildella is fighting hard, recognizing that Durrell is stronger, more experienced, and has more energy than she does. Durrell claims that he only has this power thanks to Tezranic, who allows him to use aura even when he's on the dark side. Sildella telepathically asks Karnak if vampires have any weaknesses. Karnak, frustrated, replies that if he knew, the battle would already be over. Barrows comments that, in his past life, vampires were so weak compared to him that he didn't even care about them. Desperate, Sildella asks Barrows for help, but he jokes, "Do you want Plan P?" She immediately refuses. For God's sake, not possession. Deciding to fight alone, her aura grows intensely, and she launches a wave of power in Dural's direction. Surprised, Dural asks where all that power came from. Sildella advances against him, but Dural confidently states that a small difference in power will not change the outcome of the battle. Dural manages to easily dodge Sildella's attack and immediately strikes back with an aura blast. Sildella realizes that she won't be able to beat Dural just by increasing her aura, but Barrows starts talking to her telepathically, recalling their training. He reminds her that she used to lose a lot of power in her attacks because she didn't know how to dose the amount of power in each blow. Barrows advises Sildella to concentrate, unite body and mind, and make the energy flow through the sword, just as it did when he possessed her body. Following Barrows' advice, Sildella manages to control her aura in a completely different way, making it much sharper. Dural notices this change, but is not intimidated and advances against her. Sildella, now thinking like Barrows, performs a blow with a huge curve, hitting Dural full-on. Surprised, she thinks, it really worked. She continues to land several consecutive blows, now understanding Barrows' technique. She doesn't aim at Dural's body or sword, but at his intentions. Dural, however, manages to dodge part of the combo and tries to attack from behind, but their auras collide, and Sildella blocks the attack perfectly. She realizes that the secret lies in identifying her opponent's every move, so she manages to dodge Dural's attacks more easily and finally lands a deep cut on his stomach. Karnak observes and comments, "I don't think she needs any more help." Barrows agrees, "Yes, she'll manage." Tarman also recognizes that Sildella is doing very well, and that now it's just a matter of finishing off the weaker vampires and then finishing off Dural. Dural, surprised by the drastic change in combat, says that whatever happens, he will kill her. His aura intensifies even more, and he unleashes a powerful blast of aura, determined to stake everything on this attack. The others realize that Dural is using his aura so intensely that it is damaging his own body, and warn Sildella that she must dodge. However, Sildella thinks, "I don't need to dodge it. My master can regenerate a new limb for me if anything happens." With that, she fearlessly steps forward to face Dural's aura blast. The impact of the clash between the auras is so powerful that the ground cracks, and everyone around feels the danger of approaching. When the smoke finally clears, Dural's head is rolling around on the floor as he incredulously mutters, "That's impossible." Sildella, however, is completely unharmed. After the battle, Alice heals Sildella's wounds. As dawn approaches, the remaining vampires begin to burn under the sun. Tarman, satisfied, comments that he now has enough evidence and that they can inform headquarters and bring Count Brant to justice. Meanwhile, in Count Brant's castle, chaos ensues. The Order of the King invades the residence, burning the vampires and hunting down the Count, who locks himself in his study. Desperate, Brant grabs a knife and, before taking his own life, begs Tezranik to have mercy on his son. While the castle burns, the Count's son, along with other hooded vampires, flees to avoid the sun. Seized by hatred, the Count's son swears revenge on the Order of the King, promising that one day he will get even. And that concludes today's story. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Comment Karnak correctly, and I'll give you a little heart. Until next time, guys.